All right, we'll go ahead and get started. John, will you
Yes.
kick us off?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the February 26, 2020 Wildlife Conservation Board meeting. I welcome you all into the room. I will do a quick introduction of the board members up here to complete the quorum process. To my immediate right is Mr. Chuck Bonham, Chair of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. To Chuck's right is Chris Leaf, representing the Department of Finance. To Chris's right is Diane Colborn, a public member. To Diane's right is Catherine Moore, representing Senator Stern. And to Catherine's right is Megan D'Souza, representing Senator Borges. To my immediate left is Alina Bokde, public member. To Alina's left is Mary Kriesman, public member. To Mary's left is Keith Chalino, representing Assembly Member Edward Garcia. And then way over on the far left is my administrative assistant, Mary Ahern. And for those, my name is John Donnelly. I'm the Executive Director of the Wildlife Conservation Board. And so with that, Chuck, we do have a quorum.
Great. So for the first timers, if you need the restrooms, they're out to the right past the elevator bank. If there's an emergency, we just head straight out the door. And the way this will work is we'll get through ministerial items, consent items. We may end up, as a board, deciding to pull a couple items off consent for discussion. And then when we get to proposed items, what you'll see is the staff give a presentation based on a series of slides. Board members will engage with staff and ask questions, and then we'll open up each item to public comment. If you know you want to comment on an actual agenda item, there are speaker forms in the back. Just fill them out and then bring them.
We'll hand them back to the staff back there, and they'll bring them up here.
Great. We've got several hours set aside. We'll see if we need that long, and it's usually a pretty fun meeting because people are proposing projects, and most likely they're going to be awarded some amount of funding. So with that, why don't we turn to the first substantive agenda item after roll call. And let me take a second and frame up this agenda item as I see it. So many of you, as our community of stakeholders that engage with us and as board members, have been living through a modernization of this entity. So if you go back in time, and we've been around for some time, 1947. This board had 3 members only for decades. The president of the Fish and Game Commission, the director of the Fish and Wildlife Department, and a member from the Department of Finance. And then we had an advisory body. But at the voting level, we had 3 members. Keeping a quorum was hard. And over time, in the past couple of years, we've added board members. We have public members for the first time. The board's gone through its first strategic plan endeavor and produced that and actually revised that. And we come to another item, which I think is about, in my view, the operation of a public entity. I think we've had a historical practice, custom, that the director of the department serve as the chair of the board. And we just did that. We never asked whether we should have a conversation about who should be board chair, whether we should rotate, whether we should vote. And I'm willing to continue doing it. I'm glad to do it, but I also want to open it up to board members. If there's someone who has a strong desire or you think we need to take a different approach on how we make this decision, I'm all ears, and that's this agenda item. So.
Thanks for raising that. I was sharing with John yesterday, you are super diplomatic and gracious in the role, and so I just want to appreciate that. And I think you're right. It's something good to consider. I think having a chair of WCB who's a public member and can kind of be a good ambassador out in the world could add a lot of value and really bridge some of the public outreach and engagement that we've been talking about and help position WCB really well. So I think there could be a lot of value. I am not volunteering, but I think we have a lot of great folks on the board who could play the role really well. I think it's a good conversation to have.
It says discussion and selection.
Oh.
But I think it's up to us what we want to do. I mean, we could discuss for a long time. We could select. You could decide we want to do a co-pilot role, chair, co-chair, vice chair. I'm open to whatever. So, and I realize we've got a long agenda. So.
Yeah, I just want to echo, I think, Mary's appreciation of your role. I think you have managed the meetings well, so very much want to appreciate you in taking on that leadership role. I think I do agree that it would be, I think it would be a good idea to have at least a process on a, annual basis where we have a discussion. I think for me, I would also just like to kind of better understand what is the time commitment, role expectation around chair, just to because I think the opportunity to, if that was one of the goals of the chair of the board is to be more, or to go out and try to be at more events and, just to have a better understanding of maybe some of the expectations around the role or the opportunity around the board chair position would be, just for us to have a conversation as a board around that would be a useful exercise for me. So,
I'll just ditto what was said by my other two board members, and thank you again for a great job that you've done. I can see that I can see both things. On the one hand, I can see where having maybe one of the public members of the board be the chair might be somebody who would have a little more time and ability to do things like, more of the outreach, where as one of the public members, obviously you have a lot of other duties and responsibilities with your existing function. On the other hand, the department and the commission, because of the nature of the work that the department and the commission do, are kind of maybe in a unique position to help facilitate as board member and maybe have a little bit more knowledge of all the projects and issues and priorities than others would. So I agree, it makes sense to have a process, and maybe it's a rotation, where yeah. So
Chris, you got it.
Yeah, what I've seen in other boards that finance participates in is there's often a chair and a vice chair, and it's rotated every year. So the vice chair would take over in year 2, and then as chair, and then a new vice chair is chosen. That might be something useful to consider here.
Yeah, so building on that, I mean, one way to think about today could be whether we have alignment on the need for some form of process. Maybe we don't have to select today. And an experience I had was when our sister commission, the Fish and Game Commission, realized it was just showing up each year and whoever was chair would stay chair. And they began by just observing they needed a process. They decided the first meeting of each calendar year, it would be a firm agenda item. They ended up with a chair, co-chair kind of dynamic so you can mentor and then swap. And they also put some limitations on themselves so someone wouldn't serve, for life. So today could be, mostly we feel more comfortable about needing some structure and a process, and we want to make the change instead of forcing selection. That might give us the space to think about what we're not achieving with the chair position we might want to. And I will say I kind of agree with Diane on the point that I feel, since I'm in the department daily, the board staff are, within our HR, our payroll, our personnel, we have a very high fluency kind of dynamic because all the items have a easy familiarity for me because of what we're doing day in and day out at the department. So I do think that's kind of one side of the coin, and another is change is good, and I don't think anybody should hold a position forever. So.
In terms of a process to figure out what type of board leadership would best serve WCB, and I don't know all the rules around this, but should we have a couple executive session conversations about what that could look like and what that process could be? Should we kind of do an actual kind of here's what we're, and then agendize kind of the proposal for a public meeting?
And take feedback on.
Exactly, take feedback on it, let the public weigh in, and then do a vote on, you know, both what we would do immediately, but also the process moving forward, an ongoing process.
Colin, it's always wise to seek your legal counsel advice. When someone mentions executive session, is it within the appropriate boundaries for us to have that kind of discussion in executive session, or instead we need to put down an agenda item, have it in open session, end up with a process, and engage the public that way?
Sure. My recommendation is to make it public. I don't think under Bagley Keene that's something that is available to the board to discuss in closed session.
Okay.
And as I'm hearing it, I'm not sure. As I'm hearing it, it's really, I think, what you said, Chuck, is the concept of electing a chair and then a vice chair, sort of having that rotate on a 2-year basis. And I think that that's something that John and staff, we can develop, bring to the next board meeting. You can have a discussion about that and then take action relative to that and adopting that as a process for the board moving forward.
Would you also be able to take a survey of other conservancies and just give us a flavor for how, whether there's a majority perspective on how this is handled? And I would be okay if you also want to have a third component, which is just kind of a whiteboard exercise. What could be a more optimal use of a chairperson's, position for the benefit of the board overall? And then have that discussion next meeting? Just kind
Yeah,
of
I
curious.
think that's absolutely right. I think having some options and understanding kind of what models are out there, as well as how options for how we think about the chair role, right? Are there ways that we can be thinking about it differently? The benefits, just not a job description, but a little bit of what that would be and look like. Yeah, some options for discussion would be great.
Yeah, and absolutely. And as you'll see in the closed session, there are some duties that the chairperson will be taking on more than likely moving forward today.
Great. Do you think we need a motion? Yeah, no.
No.
Okay. All right, great. So we'll have that as an agenda item next time. Those in the audience who are dying to follow this item, you can show up the next.
One other thing I would add is it would be great to hear from John and the staff too. And I think if we're making changes, it's great to think about, if we had a magic wand, what would we do with, thinking differently about leadership of the board? We've expanded the board. And so just ideas of what are ways that if you guys had dream scenarios, what would that look like for staff and for you, John? So that we could also make sure whatever we're considering includes your wish list of, what would be helpful for the board moving forward in delivering its mission.
Okay.
Cool. Moving right along, the next agenda item is public forum.
Yeah, can I make one comment, though, before we get started? And I should have done this at the beginning of the meeting. I do want to let folks know that, and the board members know, that this meeting is being Skyped. This is our first live Skyping meeting.
Yay!
So we did test the process at the last board meeting. We had folks around the state listening in on a trial basis, and it wasn't fully publicly available at that time, but this meeting is. And so thanks to staff and the Department of Fish and Wildlife's tech staff that are here And so looking forward to continuing this process going forward.
So that makes two of my legacies. One was getting electronic timesheets at the department. And the other is Skype for the board. Hey, so the next agenda item 3 is public forum for items not on this agenda. So if you want to make a comment to the board about something not on this agenda, now's the moment. Okay, seeing no one coming up to the podium.
Actually, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I do want to acknowledge for this particular item, I did receive, and the board received through me late last week, a letter from the Friends of the Northern San Jacinto Valley requesting that I agendize a project for discussion regarding the San Jacinto Wildlife Area Potrero Unit. The board acquired the Potrero Unit and the department took title to the property back in 2003. And so I just wanted to let the board in, and they asked that I make this an agenda item at the next meeting. I plan to talk with the Department of Fish and Wildlife staff. It is going through a process right now for opening that up for public access, but it's not ripe yet to do that. And so I'll be talking to the department, and I'm not committing to agendizing this at the next meeting, but we'll work through the process and let you folks know whether, and you'll see if it's going to be agendized or not. Okay. And I
think agenda item 4 is funding status.
The funding status, yes, this is an informational item. This gives a representation. And for those who wishing to speak on consent items, make public comments on consent items, we'll do that during the consent item calendar item. So we'll allow public comment during that period. But the funding status, this gives a representation of all of the funding that's available to the Wildlife Conservation Board. This includes the list that you see in the agenda. This includes the current appropriations that we have. It includes projects that are aligned for this board meeting and the expenditure of those funds. It also takes into account projects that are currently in the queue at a staff level that we're currently working on, and then ultimately gives you the balance of the unallocated balance that we have to work with. So bottom line is we have on our books right now $420 million, almost $421 million. We have a little over $35 million agenda today. We have about $187.5 million worth of projects that we're currently working on, and then that gives us a total projected unallocated balance of almost $200 million. And then it also identifies the current tax credits that has been awarded by the board over the years since the tax credits inception in 2000. I'm happy to answer any questions related to any of the funding that's on this sheet, if you have any.
Thank you for that. I just want to make a general overall comment. Two comments. One, I would like to at least propose to the board to add a kind of standing agenda item that just items from the board. Maybe it can be towards the end of the meeting in case there's any, big picture discussion. So just a recommendation. And then the second thing on the funding side, it might just be me, but I was struck by, how today we are considering almost $35 million of funding of, wonderful projects. But, I would like to recommend the development of some kind of grant summary sheet that could accompany the packet that would have we've talked a lot as part of the update to the strategic plan, to look at kind of regional distribution, understanding the processes by which these grants are, come to the board. And so something that, lists the grantee, but also the funding for that region. So I know we have 7 regions that make up the state. And so looking at out of the 35 that's on the table today, how is that distributed kind of across the 7 regions for our information, because it's hard for me to kind of track that information. And then also, John and I had a good conversation about that a lot of the grants that are, projects that are before us did go through a competitive grant process. And so also kind of highlighting that as part of, better understanding that process by which the final recommendation is being made to the board. So we have a better so that I have a better understanding of that kind of process, which goes to, again, making sure, we're going out, making, both existing grantees, but potential grantees aware of the programs, the funding sources, going around the state and really, promoting the wonderful programs of the board. And so, but having some kind of an overview for each meeting that, both identifies that distribution, but also talks a little bit more about that, what the process was for that program and selecting the projects that are before the board. So that's also just a general statement, but also a request for the board's consideration. Obviously, want John's any additional input he might want to put in, but.
Yeah, we'd be
Thank
happy
you.
to do that. And I think it's easy to do. All these projects go through a competitive process. And when the project goes through a land acquisition evaluation or conceptual area protection plan process, we identify that in this, but it's easy for us to do and acknowledge the kinds of process that the individual projects went through, whether it was through a selection committee process and how it scored through that process, where it ranked in the overall. That's easy to do. And we can also provide a map, a statewide map, to show where projects are aligned within the state on every agenda. That's not hard to do at all.
Makes sense.
That's great. I love that. I think that would be, there's been a few times where I know we have had that, and I'm just curious, when have been the times where we've done that? Because it's been so helpful to see the map of distribution.
The time we've done that, and you'll see it 2 times this morning on particular, when we've kicked off new projects under new programs here at the board. And so later this morning, you will see an overview of the Pacific Flyway solicitation process, as well as the Lower American River Conservancy Advisory Committee process and projects that are selected under that process. You'll be seeing that later. So that's when we've done that. We've shown you where those particular projects that have applications associated with them. We've provided that statewide map, and then we've showed you the projects that we've selected under that program and process. And that's when we typically have done that. But it's easy for us to do a map every board meeting to show you the diversity and the distribution of projects on a statewide basis.
That would be great to get. I feel like I'm a little far away. That would be great to get that piece. And then I think there was also a time where we had the amount of funding left out of that program versus what was being expended at the time. And then there was one that was I think the average score of projects that were selected out of scoring. I think that information would be great for us to see too. And just to reiterate, your team does an amazing job on these projects. And so I think the macro view of the programs, the selection is really our job as a board versus, double checking the work of every individual project. So I think that will help us better do our job as a board. And to that point, I also was curious, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but you mentioned around 200 million still in the books. What is the for lack of a better word, sunset of that funding? How long do you think that funding will last WCB before we get it on the ground?
If you look at what we've really laid out over the last, 5 to 6 years, we typically, you guys typically approve and allocate probably between $70 to $90 million annually. So if I project that over, the 200 million over the next 2 years, we got about 2.5 years left of funding. And that's what I gauge it by. And later today in my director's report, I'll be going over the 2019 year in review, and you can see how that's been rolled out and what that money is leveraged.
So let me run towards the next obvious question, which is what happens in 2 years? and just say this board has been around since 1947. I'm pretty confident it will continue to exist and make a difference. I couldn't tell you what that looks like 2 years from now or 3 years from now, but that legacy, I think, should give us a high confidence level. The board will still be a difference maker. It's got pretty good support. It has, I think, champions in the legislature, public members, stakeholder base that understands the importance. So.
I couldn't agree more, and I think I'm really curious about this because as we're, as a state discussing a potential new bond, what that would look like, what that would mean for the critical work the board has done.
Okay, so consent, this is a gargantuan consent calendar.
It is.
We have had, I'm aware of 2 requests, one by a board member and another by a Yuba County supervisor to actually pull item 13 off and item 21 off, just for discussion purposes. Any board member also want to pull a particular consent item off other than those 2? Okay. So what about a motion to approve the consent calendar except for those 2? And then we'll have a conversation about that.
Do you want any public comment for any of the items?
Okay. Do we have any public comment by anyone on a consent item other than item 13 and 21? Gary, I see you raising your hand. You want to come down?
Thank you, Director Bonham. Gary Reinharson, Green Diamond Resource Company, members of the board, public members, legislative staff. We wanted to speak very briefly and thank you for agenda item 7, the McKay Community Forest. And we're here with Craig Compton, and I'll let him introduce himself. This has been a long process. It's been a multi-phase process, 3 phases with pieces in each phase. The McKay Forest represented originally about 7,500 acres of Green Diamond owned land immediately adjacent to residential, high-density residential in city of Eureka. And through discussions that started over 10 years ago, has progressed to where the county now owns over 1,000 acres, and this is the final phase for transfers of the last piece of the fee ownership to the county. And then the last piece is a conservation easement on the balance of the property over 6,000 acres, which will ever be prevented from being subdivided. So that represents a significant piece. This is it contains Ryan Creek, high value coho stream. There's not marble rollets, but there's osprey, there's spotted owls. This is a unique piece of very, very productive forest land, and we'd like to thank this board and the staff and John for your work to help make this happen. John.
Yeah, John Bernstein. I'm the North Coast project manager for the Trust for Public Land. Know some of you folks. Just wanted to thank the board and the agencies for their patience in dealing with this long and complicated project, and we're delighted that it's finally coming to the end of its funding odyssey. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Diane, you want to?
Sure. Quick, we have a lot of items on the consent this week, and it was really helpful for me in a conversation with John yesterday to hear kind of how we picked what goes on consent and how we picked what goes on the regular agenda, because I just think for the public to know that piece just quickly, since we have so many folks.
Sure. The way we do it in-house is we, first and foremost, if there's any opposition or if there's any issues or if there's any problems with a particular project, then that automatically would not go in consent. The other thing is we look at the overall cost, the overall dollar amount of a particular project. And then lastly, whether or not a particular project has been, not the specific project, but other projects that are associated with the project, have they been considered by the board? Have they been reviewed by the board? that they've been discussed at any given board meeting. And that's the way we look at the projects. And if they meet that criteria, then I usually put them on consent. And, you know, it doesn't always happen, particularly if we have a smaller board meeting. I will put more on the presentation calendar than I would on a consent item calendar, but that's typically how we pick the projects. And then I would like to point out for this particular consent item, I would recommend approval of the consent item calendar, excluding items number 13, which will be presented, item 17, which has been withdrawn at this time, item number 20, which has been withdrawn, and then item number 21, which will be presented later. So with that, all of the consent items excluding those 4.
Okay. Second. All in favor? Aye. Great. So why don't we turn to item 13 now? And do we want to do this?
We can, I mean, they're prepared.
Why don't we hear Supervisor Fletcher's input? And if the board is interested, staff could also make a presentation summary around the project.
Good
So
morning,
welcome,
Board.
Supervisor.
Chair. Thank you for allowing me just a couple of minutes. As we all know, there's never enough time, and I could probably spend 2 or 3 hours on this. And I'd like you to keep in mind that even though I'm one person standing here, I invited my entire district of 17,000 people, and they elected not to come. I don't think you have that much time, so I'll try to encapsulate this as quickly as I can.
And remind us your name.
And I'm Randy Fletcher, 5th District Supervisor in Yuba County. So I'm not here to oppose this particular item. Actually, I'm very much in favor of what you do and how you do it. But one of the items that I must bring to your attention that you probably are well aware of, and that's the maintenance of the property that you work with. As all of us know, we have an issue in our forest. We have a management issue that we don't maintain the property in the Sierras. And that is a safety issue that I have to bring to everyone's attention on a regular basis. How do we maintain the safety of our communities? Today, you're looking at millions of dollars of property, but yet I don't see the maintenance attached to this property. And that maintenance on a safety issue is huge. In 2017, we had a fire called the Cascade Fire. It started very close to Donovan and Doherty Hill. As a result of that fire, we lost about 15,000 acres, over 50 homes, 200 structures, and 4 people died. It all happened in a matter of hours. Having been involved with it, I was next to it. I was in the middle of that smoke. It's scary. Since that time, I have tried to get some of this property cleaned, and I have yet to find the right person that's willing to spend the time and the energy necessary to clean this property. I don't know if any of you have had the actual opportunity to come to Yuba County and take a look at this and the importance of it and the value that by cleaning this properly, it can protect our upper country and our lower. It's a large section of ground. I spent some time on the Sierra Nevada Conservancy where we allocated funds to different projects. And I've had the Conservancy staff join me at this location. It is an ideal location to help reduce our fire issue. By having a large chunk of ground similar to these 3 parcels, if they are maintained correctly, we have the potential to actually, if not reduce a fire, control that fire before it goes to the next community. You have property all over the state, and I don't know what they look like. But this one I do know, and I drive it probably every other day, and I see it on a regular basis. What I need is your help. I think the entire state needs your help. That not only do you acquire property, but you maintain that property, and it becomes a responsibility. I'm a small landowner in Brownsville. I have about 100 acres of timber and orchard. I would like to add to that property and make a larger chunk. The neighbor wants to sell that property. Even though I'd like to buy it, I won't. And the reason is I don't have enough money to maintain that property. I know it in a budget. I understand what it takes. So I use my funds to maintain what I have for the safety of our community. It's an encouragement. I don't know how else to put it, that it's one thing to own it, but it is essential that you maintain it. Every one of us lives somewhere, and if your neighbor doesn't maintain your property, their property next to your property, you pay a price for that. And again, we have a crisis in California. We have a management crisis, and a lot of us are working on solutions to that. So, again, I'm going to capsulize. Help me do that. In Yuba County, help us maintain it. I've yet to find the right person that's really working with us on this location, but it could have the difference between life and death in Yuba County. I take that very seriously. It is my responsibility to actually be here along with those other 17,000 to make this presentation to you. So again, thank you for your time. I will follow up with a letter to the chair, and we do have some suggestions. I hate it when people show up in front of our board and complain, but yet they have no solutions. And I think we have some ideas that would be beneficial. And on limited time, I won't present that, but I'll follow up and let's see what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. We have another speaker card on this item, Ms. Debbie Byrne.
Good morning. My name's Debbie Byrne, and I actually was a local government representative on the Stakeholders Advisory Group for the strategic vision. I am a resident of Yuba County. I had to evacuate because of the Cascade Fire, and I ended up being the shelter manager for the livestock that were evacuated. I happened to be at a Board of Supervisors meeting yesterday giving an update on the strategic vision and the service-based budgeting project that's going on now when Supervisor Fletcher asked if I was interested in speaking to this issue here today. So I'm speaking as a resident of Yuba County, but I will tell you that when the Stakeholders Advisory Group was meeting on a regular basis, this was a concern. Management of the land that's being acquired by the state was a significant concern that was brought up often at our Stakeholders Advisory Group meetings. The Doherty Hill Wildlife Area, most of it burned in the Cascade Fire. To date, 2.5 years later, there are still many dead trees which pose a significant hazard to any visitors to the wildlife area. There is still no management plan for the entire Doherty Hill area. There is now an actual person who manages that land. Before, it was the responsibility of the county wildlife, or of the wildlife biologist for the state that was assigned to our county. And since he had 2 other counties that he was also working in, we never got that management plan. So the part where we are most concerned with is obviously the plan for management with respect to fire danger because of the impact it has on the surrounding community. So I'm here to ask that with all the WCB acquisitions, there be at least a timeline for putting a management plan in place, along with where the budget could come from, and you know what consideration could be given by the department to working with, interfacing with the local governments with respect to the state lands that are within that local government's jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, any questions for staff on this project? Staff may want to come on up to the...
Yeah, I just was wondering if staff could speak briefly to the, I mean, this is property that's being acquired that, according to the staff report, says it's annual grasslands, oak woodlands, and foothill riparian habitat, and it sounds like the primary purpose of the acquisition is to provide deer grazing and, you know, range for deer. And so I'm just interested if you could maybe comment briefly about, you know, what kinds of management practices would be appropriate in an area that would be meeting both the objectives of the acquisition for the wildlife habitat and then the fire hazard concerns that have been raised by the local folks. I don't know whether this is something that DFW, you know, consults with CAL FIRE on, or.
So
Yeah.
to buy staff a moment, I would just say, as I understand this particular agenda item, it's a discrete project of 22 acres that's adjacent to an already owned Department wildlife area. So my guess would be the comments may be about the 22 acres, but are also about the broader policy issue, management of wildlands in our rural communities. And on that front, one of the things we see going on at the department right now is more use of managed grazing as a catastrophic fire risk strategy. The proposed agenda does say a reason why some grazing hasn't happened here is because perimeter fences have not been built. That is a potential, I would imagine. And the department has an obligation to be a good neighbor. So I, as director, and our regional managers remain pretty open to that kind of input from our county representatives about how to reduce the wildland fire risk. You want to add anything on this particular project?
Well, I'll just reiterate what you said. When I was doing the due diligence for this project, I had many conversations with Region. Josh Bush is behind me. He's the lands manager for Region 2. And certainly one of the upsides of this acquisition that I was, as far as I was told, is that in the future it will be grazed. So it will help with the fire risk out there once they get a fence up. And I couldn't tell you the timing of that if this acquisition goes through, but it would be grazed in the future. Which would help, and I would think the neighbors would appreciate. As far as actual management of the wildlife area, I think I'd let Josh speak on that.
Thank you. Just in relation to management and bringing cows onto the property to graze and the concerns brought up by the local representatives, we lacked in the past staff capacity to manage it and repair funding or repair fencing necessary to allow a grazer onto the property. Within the past 2 to 3 years, we have funded and hired a lands conservation staff, an actual program within the North Central region. There are 3 permanent employees and I think 5 scientific aides. one of their largest tasks right now that they're working on is fencing this entire wildlife area. I think they have made significant progress, if not close to being completed, with the plan to send out a request for proposal for grazing and vegetation control permits sometime soon. So I'd be happy to work with the local representatives and give them the correct contacts where they can get a timeline to get this property grazed and get some of those fuel loads down.
Any other questions? Okay. So anybody want to make a motion or have any other further thoughts on the particular project? I'll second we approve the project as proposed, acknowledging the public input, and as director, directing our regional staff to make sure they exchange business cards with the supervisor and follow up on a timeline and kind of a structure to deal with the concerns raised. I think I seconded it, did I? Yeah, okay. All in favor? Aye. Great, thank you. Okay, so we have one more of the consent items that we wanted to talk about, which is item 21. So what's your preference? You want to hear a presentation or you want to?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to just hear the presentation. I'd like to better understand the scope of the project. If we could maybe start there, and then I have some questions.
Certainly. Good morning, members of the board. Riding Ranch is a 230-acre property that 20 years ago was developed and managed as a golf course with subsequent plans to put in executive homes. Those plans fell through and the project was sold to be managed by the East Bay Parks through a prior WCB grant. Most of the project right now consists of remnant weeds from its management as a golf course, and there are several components of the project. One is to basically control the existing weeds that are on there, restore that with native grasslands, and there's also a planning component to restore existing ponds. I'm going to jump forward a little bit here. Existing ponds right now that are lined with plastic. They were initially water traps and they served irrigation purposes, but they want to restore these to a functioning wetland system. For that, they're going to have to do some more background planning for that component of the project. So this is a partnership between the East Bay, the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy and the landowner, the East Bay Regional Parks District. So from here, you can see this site visit was done in the wintertime, but these are basically, it's covered with non-native plants, and they basically want to restore grassland. There's some property, an adjacent property, Horse Valley, that they did similar work on, and so it does have some regional significance with the adjacent native grasslands and another project that WCB is invested in.
So a couple questions. So is the thinking that once the kind of weed abatement and process is complete, then the grasslands would be planted, the native grasslands would be planted in throughout the golf course property?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then, so is there because, we all know how difficult it is to manage weeds, and especially with golf courses. I mean, they're rampant, as obviously this project demonstrates. And so, is there, outside of this funding source, is there a commitment to what's the process of kind of continuing to manage the weeds so that the seedlings, because, and again, I'm not a biologist, but if you're putting seedlings in and the weeds come back, what will this be a successful kind of transition, I guess, from from the maybe one, I don't know if it's like a series of weed abatement that then result in the wetlands, or not the wetlands, sorry, the grasslands restoration. I'm just curious because that's, you had like 14 or many different type of weeds, invasive weed species. And so I wasn't clear from the report just what the kind of management goals are to ensure that the grasslands will actually take root and be successful in transitioning from one environment to another.
Yeah, there's a couple of components here. Is that the area, as it was once a golf course, it was purposely managed without having native grasslands in place. Is basically those species of grass is amenable to owning and operating a golf course.
Right.
So a more intensive management is needed on that area proper. Now, colonization can happen from adjacent areas, but those adjacent areas are being managed as native grassland. So we're hoping that that could be more easily maintained. You'll have a momentum that exists once this more intensive restoration process happens over the next couple of years. This is under the East Contra Costa Habitat Conservation Plan, so there's a lot of attention in this area as a grassland resource. We're hoping with, I don't have the details on what an actual plan exists in place from the Habitat Conservancy in East Bay Parks, but there is a lot of attention on the project, and again, we're hoping that there's enough momentum where you can control the resource a little bit better once you do this more active restoration phase.
And so because it's obviously 200 plus acres is also a significant piece of property for restoration. So is this grant going to go into the native seed farm project so there's enough grassland like coming in? I guess I was just concerned about like did the overall kind of approach of both addressing the significant weed infestation issue, but then having enough, being able to have enough like native grassland seedlings to kind of help with that restoration. I wasn't sure in reading the report that, because it says here seedling will occur in selected areas where invasive weed removal occurs, but it's going to be from a native seed farm. So there's enough kind of supply, I guess, for the demand.
I'm trying to pull back on when I was actually visited the site and I was speaking with the applicant.
Okay.
There's a couple of components of that as well, is that they do have nearby and in some cases on the site where there really wasn't an active golf course. There is some native seed banking capabilities there. It's not 100% non-native. Also, they do have sources that they would provide, achieve through seed banks. I didn't remember hearing about a supply issue at the time.
All right. Okay, because I'm just looking at the grant award. I just don't know what 120,000 kind of equates to and how that correlates to 200 plus acres of property. So it's just curious, obviously the goal is to transition it from a very impacted habitat to the restoration of grasslands, but and then on the wetland, so in your report, it sounded like so do you anticipate after this study that they will come back to the board for additional funding to actually then do the restoration work for the ponds that are there, or?
I would imagine so, because they do not, right now, this is about the design phase. It's probably all they have time for within the contract term of this grant is they would need to seek additional funds to do an implementation project to restore the wetlands.
And then just my last question on the strategic plan goals. You have 3.4, S3.4, which is, I was just curious because it says, invest in projects that have primary or secondary purpose of non-consumptive wildlife recreation, such as bird watching or hiking. So is this project contemplate improving like public access or providing public access? So I'm just curious what that's connecting to on the scope of the project.
Yes, if I can pull back one of the slides, you see a path on the right side of the slide. There already is parking, a walkway, as well as I think they still even have temporary restroom infrastructure. The site had such popularity for that type of recreation that the county for liability purpose had to gate it off at the time I did the site visit. So there is definitely a demand, and there's an intent to have more usage, public usage of this project once it's completed.
Okay, great. Thank you.
At one kind of higher level, this is also a property it's basically on the backside of Mount Diablo in the East Bay area. And there's a state, federal, multi-species conservation plan. And these properties are part of what's called the preserve network, where the layers of government, state, federal, local, are acquiring properties and restoring them to create a landscape connectivity of open space, which then allows the county and the department to fast track permitting for development in other parts of the county. So this parcel fits within a much bigger county-wide permitting multi-species preserve creation strategy.
That's helpful background. I mean, I think it's just this project just, it's an ambitious kind of transition to go as, someone who has helped manage golf courses. It's an ambitious transition, and just curious if kind of that bigger picture thinking, the investment is really there to, that these funds would kind of have the stated impact of what's being proposed. It was, one of my issues or concerns about it, so. This may be a couple years down the road, but I would like to request, maybe even some update on this from if the restoration, how this grant is impacting those restoration activities. I just curious kind of on the impact of this project on making that transition and how successful it will be. So
certainly.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody want to I'll make a motion to approve the agenda item, incorporating the questions and the comments, including the report back on performance. We have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Great.
Thank you.
All right, so that jumps us up to item 36, which is our first of the proposed items. And the way it'll work is staff will give a quick presentation. Board members, feel free to engage with staff and amongst yourself. Then we'll see if there are public speakers on each agenda item.
Great, thank you. So this is our first item on our presentation calendar this morning. James Croft will be presenting the project to you this morning. But before he gets into the actual project, he'll be giving you a brief overview of the Pacific Flyway solicitation process that we went through. So with that, James.
Thank you and good morning. The Proposition 68 funded 2019 Pacific Flyway Conservation Solicitation was released mid-year last year and was a call for grant applications to implement multi-benefit climate adaptation and resiliency projects that protect, restore, or enhance migratory bird habitat, improve migratory bird habitat diversity, quality, and connectivity, or improve management and ecological function of migratory bird habitat within the Pacific Flyway. The solicitation's eligibility area was statewide, and applicants were asked to implement a habitat or species goal of one of the 5 migratory bird joint ventures located in California. The scope of the eligibility area was reflected in the variety of applications received. As an example of this variety, we received an application for a conservation easement in the Amargosa Valley to protect the largest intact block of mesquite bosque habitat in the eastern Mojave Desert. That's just south of Death Valley National Monument, for the benefit of neotropical migratory birds. In contrast, we received an application to restore upland nesting habitat on Anacapa Island, the smallest island within the Channel Islands, for the Scripps murrelet, a migratory seabird who only breeds within the Channel Islands and the Pacific Islands off the coast of Baja, California. Talk about fractured habitat. This is a picture here of the Scripps mullet, which was listed as a statewide threatened under CISA in 2004. Following the model of previous WCB Prop 68 grant programs, we started the application process with a pre-application or concept phase, from which a subset of applicants were selected to submit full applications. Full applications were reviewed and scored by no fewer than 3 reviewers each, and the selection committee chose the final group of projects to be presented to the board for funding consideration. The priorities for this solicitation, let me move this guy here, sorry, were the restoration enhancement of wetlands, tidal marsh, estuarine, meadow, or riparian habitat, restoration or enhancement of upland nesting and or foraging habitat, restoration of native vegetation, or the acquisition of migratory bird habitat. And that would be fee title acquisition or conservation easement. In the pre-application phase, we received 50 concept proposals or concept applications with a total funding request just over $46.3 million, which is quite a bit more than our $9.25 million allocation for this program. So we were very happy that it was a pretty popular program. During our full application phase, we received 21 full applications with a funding request of $23.8 million. Ultimately, 12 projects were selected for funding consideration by the committee. And taking a look at this map of those 12 projects really highlights the scope and diversity, I think, of the projects that we received. It's a pretty good balance of projects throughout the state. We were expecting our normal, waterfowl-centric projects from the Central Valley that we normally fund through our Inland Wetlands Conservation Program. But we're pretty surprised to be able to look at a project that's off the coast of California in the Channel Islands, or a project that's basically an oasis in the desert in the Amargosa Valley. We also did get some of those typical waterfowl projects that are very important for us to continue to look at, as the Central Valley provides habitat for tons of waterfowl and migratory birds throughout the breeding and migratory season. And I just wanted to share a quick share with this picture for you guys. This was a picture that I took in November of last year at the Gray Lodge Wildlife Area. So this is that sunset during the flyout. Estimates from wildlife area staff placed 500,000 birds on the wildlife area that day. That number had been doubling every day leading up to that 500,000 count, and was expected to continue doubling for at least the next few days into the coming week. And that was taken with my trusty department issued iPhone. Are there any questions regarding that solicitation or any comments?
Everybody good? Any questions? I have one question. So in doing the solicitation for the program, the availability of funding, what were again, can you go over quickly the mechanisms that you used to let people know about the potential program funding?
As far as marketing and outreach?
Yeah, marketing and outreach. Yeah,
definitely. I contacted each of the 5 migratory bird joint ventures, presented them with timelines of our solicitation. We put out our pre-concept phase document that went out to everyone so they could look at our priorities. They could look at the schedule for the solicitation, as well as all of the documents that were required, the application, the priorities, and everything that applicants would need to apply. We also reached out to our regular stakeholders and make sure we made everyone aware. We also We also got outreach that we didn't really know about from a lot of folks that we don't normally interact with. We don't do a lot of projects out on the Channel Islands, so it was really nice to see that that word, I believe, had spread, kind of word of mouth throughout stakeholders, and we ended up, I think, selecting a good inventory of projects throughout the state. And for those 12 projects, I'll be presenting the first one to you today, and then the next 11 will roll out over the next 3 board meetings. So you guys will get a fantastic, I think, overview of just the breadth of the different project types, which I think is reflected in the breadth of the species that we have here in California.
Thank you.
I do have a quick question. Yeah, I'm just wondering for the projects that don't make that initial cut, and the ones that maybe aren't in the final selection group, is there any feedback that the departments or the board staff is providing or could provide back to the applicants to help them maybe better understand, why they didn't make the cut, or why their project was found to be not sufficient, or, things that they could do to maybe improve their ability to be considered in the future?
Yes. When I sent out the award notice, basically the group of yeses and nos, I extended the opportunity to every applicant who was not successful in both the concept and the full application phase to request a debriefing meeting where I went over their scores, general comments that our reviewers had about their application, and provided some input to help them, come back with a stronger, more competitive project. Just as an overall, I kind of really had to tell everyone, it's not you, it's me. We got a lot of really, really good projects, and there were no bad projects in our group. There was just some that were better than others. So we tried to fund the best projects overall, the cream of the crop. And anyone who is not successful will get an opportunity for another round of funding that we're expecting for Pacific Flyway next July. So we have a tentative schedule of releasing a concept phase this October to kind of get ahead of the money, with selecting projects next May. Money comes in July 1, and then you guys, or I will be presenting the first projects for board funding consideration next August.
We're just going to get started with item 36.
Great. Any questions? You've done questions.
No questions.
Just on the presentation, but they haven't presented on the project yet.
Check out my flyway. Fly out at sunset, Great Lodge Wildlife Area. Fantastic.
You took that?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. All right, so the first project that I'd like to submit for your consideration through the 2019 Pacific Flyway Conservation Solicitation is a project at the Shasta Valley Wildlife Area. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to Ducks Unlimited Incorporated for a cooperative project with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to enhance wetland habitat on the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Shasta Valley Wildlife Area. The wildlife area is located approximately 8 miles east of Wairika in Siskiyou County. Shasta Valley Wildlife Area is a state-owned wildlife area composed of approximately 4,700 acres of Great Basin juniper woodland, riparian forest, seasonal wetlands, and croplands, with Mount Shasta as the backdrop. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife acquired the property in 1991 and manages the property to provide habitat for a variety of wildlife, including waterfowl, sandhill cranes, raptors, shorebirds, upland game birds, and deer. There are 3 reservoirs on the wildlife area, 2 of which provide angling opportunities for Eagle Lake rainbow trout and largemouth bass, named Trout Lake and Bass Lake, respectively. Recreational opportunities at the wildlife area include hunting, fishing, hiking, wildlife viewing, and bird watching. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife holds adjudicated water rights on the Little Shasta River that have been used for management of various wetland and upland units on the wildlife area. Water from the Little Shasta River flows through a screened diversion, which you see here, a very modern conical fish screen that keeps the coho salmon out of our irrigation ditches. Water is then pumped into an open earthen ditch, making its way to Steamboat Lake. Water in Steamboat Lake is then gravity delivered to many managed wetland and upland units throughout the wildlife area. The primary water management objective of this system is to pump water into Steamboat Lake in the fall and winter, save it there, when water is available in the river, to set up the wildlife area for its spring and summer habitat management operations that include managing quality wetland and upland habitats, providing brood water for waterfowl, and growing waterfowl foods. The existing pump station on the Little Shasta River is reaching the end of its useful life, is undersized, and is not functioning at a high capacity. Ducks Unlimited has secured North American Wetlands Conservation Act funds through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to design and construct a new pump station to replace this current pump. With the increase in water flow from the new pump station, the existing ditch will be fully inundated and will have difficulty supporting the increased flows that may damage the ditch. This project will design and construct an approximately 2,300-foot pipeline from the new pump station to feed into Steamboat Lake. Currently, this slide shows the pump station delivers water from a short pipe into this basin, and then it's then delivered from the basin, just gravity fed down to Steamboat Lake. So from this point in the picture to Steamboat Lake, we'll be replacing this ditch with a pipeline. Constructing the pump station and pipeline will allow wildlife area staff to more effectively manage wetlands and associated upland habitats for the wildlife that rely upon these habitats annually. Proposed work from the pump station and pipeline will enhance 556 acres of wetlands and 137 acres of managed wetland-associated uplands on the wildlife area. This is the ditch I visited last month that we'll be replacing. They'll basically be laying a pipeline within this ditch, covering it up, and that will be completing the project. We won't need to maintain this ditch anymore. The pipeline will need to be flushed out of silt occasionally, but the management for this project or for this water conveyance structure would go down quite a bit. Staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed. In the audience today to answer any questions you may have is Miss Amelia Raquel, regional biologist from Ducks Unlimited. Thank you.
Any questions for staff? I don't see any speaker cards. Is there anyone in the public that wants to comment on this item? I'll make a motion to approve the project as proposed. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item 37. This is a Central Valley Monarch Butterfly Habitat Project, enhancement project that we're doing under our Monarch Butterfly and Pollinator Program at the Wildlife Conservation Board. Is to consider a grant to River Partners for a cooperative project with the department and Kern River Corridor Endowment Holding Company that will develop and build some critical habitat for monarch butterflies. Scott McFarland on our staff will present the project. Scott.
Good morning. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to River Partners for a cooperative project with CDFW to restore 600 acres of habitat for monarchs and other pollinators across the state through strategic plantings of pollinator-friendly native plant species at sites in Sacramento Valley, San Joaquin Valley, and San Diego region. The western monarch population has declined about 98% since the late 1980s, when the population was estimated at 4.5 million. The 2019 overwintering population of western monarchs declined another 86% from the previous year, with fewer than 27,000 counted. This winter, the numbers slightly increased to 29,000. And the reason why it's not such an excitement part, they did a lot more, they had a lot more volunteers out surveying for monarchs, so they think it's relatively flat. For decades, monarchs in the West have been in decline because of loss of habitat, including destruction of their overwintering sites and loss of both milkweed for caterpillars and flowering resources to fuel their migration. Additionally, monarchs are adversely impacted by climate change and pesticide use. For this project, CDFW and River Partners have identified approximately 600 acres of natural and restored lands where River Partners will establish milkweed and nectar-rich forbs. The project team determined the sites that offer cost-effective opportunities for establishing large areas of high-quality monarch habitat. The primary factors used in site consideration included the presence of irrigation infrastructure, ability to integrate planting into planned restoration and management activities, soil type, weed pressure, compatibility with adjacent land uses such as no insecticide drift, and geographic distribution across the state. The intent to avoid large contiguous monocultures and instead focus on locations where linear bands and patches of milkweed adjacent to riparian and wetland areas can be planted. And the methods will include 1-gallon plantings, plugs, rhizomes, and seeds. Overall, this project will benefit monarch butterflies by providing milkweed, which is the host plant for monarch larvae, as well as additional nectar-rich plants. Adult monarchs are generalists that will take nectar from a variety of plants. Nectar plants that are available in early spring and late fall are especially important for supporting monarchs during their migration. These plants, in addition to milkweed, will provide floral resources for other pollinators as well, including native bees. Models of monarch and milkweed habitat sustainability show that California, and particularly the Central Valley, is a key part of the Western monarchs range. Therefore, restoring habitat at the proposed project site is an important step in monarch conservation. Native bee populations also are declining. A recent analysis by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services suggests that 40% of native bees may be at risk of extinction. A survey of North American bumblebees conducted by the Xerces Society and the International Union of Conservation of Nature finds that 28% of the species are declining. Reasons for the decline are similar to those affecting monarchs, including habitat loss, pesticide exposure, and disease pressure. Habitat restoration for monarchs will benefit the bumblebees and other native pollinators by increasing the diversity and abundance of floral resources, pollen and nectar. This is a picture of one of the department sites right now that will be the invasives taken out and milkweed planted and other ones. This is a picture one of our staff took at one of our site visits, I believe in Pismo, not on this project, but it was another one, but it's a pretty cool picture. Would conclude, staff recommends the project as proposed, and in attendance we have Maggie Blankenship and John Kane with River Partners to help answer any questions that you might have.
Long live the butterfly.
We hope so.
Any questions for staff?
Oh, sorry, one more thing I wanted to mention because it wasn't in my presentation, but when you talked about it earlier, this is the end of the funds, the $3 million that we received in 1920 fiscal year. So we used a little bit of Prop 68 also to make sure this project could be completed.
Yeah, that was my only comment I want to make, was I just want to make sure I was clear that this exhausts the funds that thus far have been appropriated for monarch projects like this. And it's just pretty startling that we've gone from, I think you said 27, what was the original,
4.5 million in the 80s, and then
now 27, 29,000.
Flattened a little below 30.
So there's a lot more work to be done, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think, it was just $3 million, but it seems like I'm hopeful that we'll have a decent impact on the state. A lot of projects we've been funding won't really show up until next winter's count. And this project may impact that a little bit too, but it'll also be the winter after that, and then we can start seeing if we're making a dent in this or not.
Do we have any?
No speaker cards?
Speaker cards. Anyone in the public want to comment on this item?
We did receive letters of support from Pat Healy with the Malibu Monarch Project, as well as Mr. Dan Silver, the Executive Director of the Endangered Habitats League.
I'll make a motion to approve the project. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Moving on, item number 38 in the agenda has been withdrawn at this time, so we'll move on to item number 39. This is to consider a grant to the Truckee River Watershed Council for a restoration project up in Sierra County. We have received several letters of support for this project. Mr. Richard Anderson, District County Supervisor of Nevada County, Forest Supervisor Ellie Lieno, U.S. Forest Service, Tahoe National Forest. Jonathan Birdsong, the Director of the Western Regional Office of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Ms. Lucy Blake, President of the Northern Sierra Partnership. Mr. Steve Frisch, President of the Sierra Business Council. And that's it. So with that, Mr. Judah Grossman on our staff will present the project this morning. Judah.
Thanks, John. Board members. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to the Truckee River Watershed Council for a cooperative project with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Bella Vista Foundation, and the Trust for Public Lands to restore 350 acres of montane meadow habitat owned by the Trust for Public Land located 13 miles southeast of Sierraville in Sierra County. Just want to point out a couple landmarks on this map while we have it up. The project area is here to the north near Stampede and Boca Reservoirs. It's north of Lake Tahoe and also north of Truckee. All right, so Sardine Meadow is situated within the larger Davies Creek watershed, and that Davies Creek watershed drains out into Stampede Reservoir. The Sardine Meadow, Stampede Reservoir. Sardine Meadow is also surrounded largely by Tahoe National Forest. And in 2003, Tahoe National Forest conducted an assessment that identified Sardine Meadow restoration as being a key component to restoring the larger Davies Creek watershed. And in 2014, the Trust for Public Land purchased Sardine Meadow for conservation purposes. In this aerial photo, you can see Davies Creek passing through Sardine Meadow, and you can also see this remnant railroad grade. So there are a couple environmental impacts that have impacted ecological function in Sardine Meadow. So grazing, logging, and then this most visible remnant, the railroad grade from a spur railroad. This oblique aerial photo shows Davies Creek passing through Sardine Meadow, and you can see this berm, which is the remnant railroad grade. And what that railroad grade has done is it's constrained the flow path for Davies Creek such that it has eroded, downcut, and lost a lot of stream length. And as a result of that, there's been a decrease in groundwater recharge and groundwater levels have dropped, which has led to a conversion from wet meadow habitat to shrubland and grassland. This ground level photo is also a view of that berm, and you can see these vestiges of wetland habitat along the base of the berm and in the stream channel itself, but the majority of the meadow, including the berm, is converted to shrubland, so it's sage-dominated habitat. This is a picture of the incised channel itself, and you can see this lush wetland vegetation, and it's constrained again into the stream bank. And you can imagine this disconnection between Davies Creek and the meadow floodplain up top. There's another view of that cut bank and the encroaching shrubland habitat and this remnant wetland vegetation, which we would expect to dominate rather the whole meadow. So this project, to correct this problem, this project would do a couple things. It would fill the cut stream bank, making it level with the elevation of the adjacent meadow, and it would also remove a portion of that railroad bed so that it could better activate these remnant channels that still exist in the meadow. So these two maps are current conditions on the left and anticipated post-restoration conditions on the right. And you can see that railroad grade bisecting the meadow. On the right, you can see that red portion, which is the anticipated portion to be removed. And so this is conceptual, but this is the intended result would be to restore flows to a vast network of these remnant channels, increase groundwater recharge, and restore the meadow to that wet meadow habitat, which really should be there, and increase its ecological function. Staff recommends the project as proposed, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have. And in the audience, we have Beth Christman, representing the Truckee River Watershed Council. Thank you.
Just a personal validation, not this project, but in the same proximate area, I've had the benefit of seeing the before and the after, and it's night and day between a dry, kind of more barren meadow, post-restoration, a very green, lush wetland complex in a high Sierra landscape. So it's a pretty proven investment strategy that produces an after-the-fact benefit. Any questions for staff? Okay. We do not have any speaker cards. Anyone in the public?
Well, we do have a
Actually, we
speaker.
do. Beth, do you want to say anything? You have a card. Okay.
So, you guys have a very, very big agenda today, but I just really wanted to say thank you very much for considering this project. This is one of the final links in the entire Davies Creek restoration that we've been working on since 2003, and it's the big, it's the big piece. So we're really excited to move this restoration forward and connect all this amazing habitat that we have out there. So thank you.
Anyone want to make a motion to approve the project? Great. I'll second. All in favor? Aye. Great.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Moving on to item number 40. Thank you, Judah. This is to consider allocation for a grant to the Sacramento County Department of Regional Parks for a project in Discovery Park, which is about a mile and a half from where we're sitting right now. Kara Allen on our staff will present the project to you. Kara.
Good morning. Agenda item 40 is a proposal that we received under the 2019 solicitation notice for the Lower American River Conservancy Program. And before introducing this project, I want to give you an update of the Lower American River Conservancy Program that will include a brief intro, as well as the program's accomplishments, including the solicitation results and what to expect in the future. So the program began in 2017, which is the year we convened the advisory committee of the program. The program was created specifically for the Lower American River Parkway, located right here in Sacramento County. And we are located at that yellow star, just for reference. The parkway extends from the Nimbus Hatchery, which is on the right-hand side of this map, downstream to the American River's confluence with the Sacramento River at Discovery Park. The program hinges on 4 main goals or resources of the parkway that include wildlife habitat, public access, education and interpretation, and water quality. In 2017, Governor Brown allocated $1 million from the general fund to jumpstart the program. From these dollars, the board approved the development of the Lower American River Natural Resources Management Plan. This plan is currently in draft form with public meetings anticipated in June of this year, followed by the release of the public draft shortly after that. The plan is expected to be complete by the end of this year. The program also received $10 million from Proposition 68, with $2.5 million released in the 2018-2019 fiscal year, and the remaining $7.5 million was released in the 2019-2020 fiscal year. For the 2018 grant cycle, we had $2.5 million available through Prop 68, and the solicitation's priorities included habitat and public access projects. We received 5 full applications, of which the advisory committee recommended 3 public access projects for funding, which included 1 land acquisition and 2 implementation projects for a total just under $2.5 million. In 2019, the board approved the 2 implementation projects. The land acquisition is still pending some last negotiations, but we are expecting to bring this to the board for consideration by the November meeting. And for the 2019 grant cycle, we had $7.25 million available through Prop 68, and the priorities included habitat and education and interpretation projects. 6 full applications were received, which the advisory committee recommended all for funding, which included 2 habitat restoration projects, 1 education and interpretation project, and 3 public access projects for a total just over $2.3 million. 4 of the 6 proposals are on today's agenda, of which 3 were on the consent calendar. And so far, the board has approved a little more than $1 million in projects recommended by the advisory committee. This amount does include the Natural Resources Management Plan. About $1.7 million in projects is pending approval today, along with another $2 million later this year. And overall, the advisory committee has recommended a little over $4 million be invested towards public access, $618,000 for habitat, and $112,000 towards education and interpretation. And this map shows the distribution of recommended projects within the parkway and the primary goal that each project advances. The orange circle represents a public access project. The green circle is for habitat projects, and the pink circle represents an education and interpretation project. Most of these projects have been presented to the board for consideration, except for the 3 projects circled in red, which again we plan to bring to you later this year. And this map shows the severely disadvantaged communities that surround the parkway. And as you can see, all the projects recommended so far are either within a severely disadvantaged community or within 1 mile of a severely disadvantaged community. We have hosted 9 meetings of the advisory committee, including 1 field trip that highlighted the lower third of the parkway. And as you all just learned, we successfully completed 2 competitive grant cycles. And what you can expect in the future is at least 2 meetings of the advisory committee per year. The first meeting of this year is scheduled March 23rd, and the second will be sometime in September. And we have about $5 million remaining in program funds, which we will discuss with the advisory committee on March 23rd, how to spend these dollars and how much should go towards the 3rd grant cycle that is being released this spring. And then October of this year, we plan on hosting our 2nd field trip of the parkway that will focus on the Middle Reach. And lastly, we'll be keeping our eye on SB 45, which is expected to be on the November ballot, and is the Wildfire Prevention, Safe Drinking Water, Drought Preparation, and Flood Protection Act of 2020. As this bill is currently written, $30 million would be made available to the program if it's passed. And if there are any questions about the program, I will take them now.
Oh,
Go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Catherine.
What's the intention to always have more than one solicitation to spend that $7.5 million?
So the $7.5 million that was available for our 2nd competitive grant, we only received about $2.7 million in requested dollars, so that money will roll over to our 3rd grant cycle.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, then moving on to agenda item 40. This is a proposal to consider the allocation of $942,000 to Sacramento County Department of Regional Parks for a public access and interpretation project at Discovery Park in the city of Sacramento. Discovery Park is located at the most downstream end of the American River Parkway, where the American River converges with the Sacramento River. It is one of the most intensively used areas of the parkway, offering access to boating, fishing, picnicking, archery, and community events, and is also a gateway to many other activities such as hiking, biking, and horseback riding. For over 30 years, Discovery Park has offered 4 picnic shelters to the community that can be reserved for private and community events. These shelters provide shade in the summer and are equipped with picnic tables, barbecues, and electrical outlets. Each picnic shelter serves between 10,000 and 14,000 people per year, which does not include the number of people that use them outside of the reservation system. These picnic shelters are over 33 years old and are made of a wooden design that, as this picture shows, they experience annual flooding events, sometimes for weeks at a time. And after 3 decades, these shelters are not doing so well. And the support beams are rotting and splitting, and the wooden rafters are also deteriorating from decades of weather exposure. To bring improved quality and access to these popular public facilities, Regional Parks is proposing to demolish 2 of the existing structures and reconstruct them using a concrete and steel design that is shown in this picture. This picture is of the oak shelter at Discovery Park that was reconstructed in 2016. The sycamore and redbud shelters will be reconstructed as part of this project and will use the same design as the oak shelter and will be in the same footprint as the existing shelters and will retain the same carrying capacity, which is 250 people per shelter. And in addition to reconstructing the picnic shelters, the project will install 5 interpretive panels, 1 at each reconstructed picnic shelter and 3 others within a 1/4 mile radius of the shelters. The type of panel will be very similar to the two shown on this slide, and the content of the panels will bring curiosity to the reader about the landscape around them and might include prompts that describe Native American significance and use of Discovery Park, the importance of floodplains for fish habitat, and how efficient land use can save space for nature. Staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed and authorize staff to proceed substantially as planned. And in the audience today, we have Liz Bellis, Director of Sacramento County Regional Parks.
Thank you, Kara.
Any questions for staff?
For the interpretive signage, will there be any multilingual signage? So, or is it all going to be in English, or what's the plan?
That was not proposed in the application to have it be multilingual. However, the exact designs of these panels have not been submitted yet for fabrication. So there's still opportunity.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know if you said the director is here or of the?
I believe so.
Be great to just get your comment on if this would be, if we could recommend that the signage does include some other multilingual to reflect maybe the diversity of the community that comes to visit, because you have a very high number, it sounds like, of visitors annually. And so if that wouldn't create an unreasonable burden, I would be curious to see if you would support that.
I can support that. Thank you very much. Liz Bellis, Director of Regional Parks, Sacramento County. Thank you and good morning. We can absolutely do that for you. We have multilingual signage for our river safety programs at Discovery Park, so that's not a problem.
Great request.
While I'm here, thank you for your consideration.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, we don't have a speaker card. Anyone in the public want to comment on this agenda item? Okay. Anybody want to make the motion to approve as proposed, subject to the multilingual panels?
Just a quick question.
Sure.
The flood picture was so impactful of the site being flooded. I'm curious if in the construction or in any other kind of project work, there's anything being done around that, around mitigating against flooding.
Well, the existing structures are wooden, and so this new design will actually be concrete and steel, so they'll be able to withstand that inundation. It won't, the water won't be eating away at the concrete as it does the wood.
I used the wrong word, adapting to the flooding. So thinking about, is there a way, either drainage or capture or anything around that to stop as significant as flooding?
Discovery Park is actually designed to flood. It's part of the flood control project for Sacramento County. So it is common that it goes underwater, and it is absolutely designed to do so.
So I'd like to make a motion to approve the Discovery Park Picnic Shelters and Interpretation project with friendly amendment for the 5 signs that are installed, that there be some incorporation of a multilingual, incorporation of into the signage, so to reflect the community. Yeah.
We have a second. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Liz. Moving on to item number 41. This is to consider a grant to Calaveras Healthy Impact Product Solutions for a cooperative project on a couple sites up in the National Forest properties. We have received letters of support from Mr. Gene Mancebo, General Manager of the Amador Water Agency.
What's up with the coconut?
I don't know. And then Peter Martin, Manager of Water Resources at Calaveras County Water District. David Briggs, Manager of the Water Operations, East Bay Municipal Utility District. And Amanda Watson, Coordinator of the Amador Fire Safe Council. And Richard Sykes, Executive Officer up at the Upper Mokelumne River Watershed Authority. And then finally, Richard Opson, District Ranger on the U.S. and El Dorado National Forest. With that, Mr. Judah Grossman on our staff will briefly present the project to you, Judah.
Thank you, John. Board members. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to Calaveras Healthy Impact Product Solutions for a cooperative project with El Dorado National Forest to enhance forest health and reduce hazardous fuels through selective thinning, prescribed fire, and replanting activities on 1,915 acres of mixed conifer forest in El Dorado National Forest, situated in Amador County. So again, I just want to point out a couple landmarks while we have this map up. This is the project area, and it's east of Pioneer and southwest of Kirkwood, shown there. So the Mokelumne River watershed is on the western slope of the Sierra Nevada, and it supports vast forest, which provides water supply for 1.4 million water users. Unfortunately, that area is also subject to drought, bark beetle, and fire suppression, which has resulted in high tree mortality and dense fire fuels on the landscape. And that's resulted in some catastrophic fires, including the Power Fire of 2004, which burned approximately 17,000 acres on El Dorado National Forest and private timberlands. The CAL FIRE data for these fire hazard severity zones reflects this fire hazard risk. And you can see the project area here, which exists almost entirely within the very high fire hazard severity zone defined by CAL FIRE. The proposed project would include post-fire recovery activities within the Power Fire boundary, and it would also thin forest for forest health and to reduce fire risk in some of the existing forest as well. This photo shows a slash pile of some of that thin material as an example, and that slash pile could be burned or masticated to remove that fire risk. In addition to the forest itself, there are also some remnant stands of aspen. So aspen grows on the landscape, and conifers have a tendency to outcompete those. And so by thinning the forest and removing some of that competition, we expect the aspen groves to return to this landscape, and they're a declining habitat type, which is very valuable. This photo doesn't really do it justice. It was in the fall. I promise they look better with leaves on, but there are some aspens in that photo. And this photo is of a slope showing some post-fire recovery activities. You can see this was thinned and then replanted and managed for post-fire recovery goals similar to the goals in this project. So staff recommends the project as proposed. I'm again happy to answer any questions that the board might have. And in the audience, we have Regine Miller and Steve Wylensky representing Calaveras Healthy Impact Product Solutions, and Rick Hobson representing El Dorado National Forest.
Any questions for Judah? Okay, we do have two speaker cards. The first is Rick Hobson. Rick, I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah, good morning. Rick Hobson, District Ranger on the Amador Ranger District, and thanks for the opportunity to come speak in front of you. A couple of things I just wanted to add. I think Judah did a great job going over the proposal, and I just want to say he's been great to work with all along. Really, the project work we have going on is to do a couple of things. One is to get a forest back onto that landscape. We've obviously been doing some of that work, but with the reality of droughts and funding limitations, this funding, if approved, will help us with that. But it's also, and that habitat, that forest, that small trees now will become critical old growth habitat in generations. So as a forester, we need to think that long term. But we're also looking to reduce that risk of that large landscape wildfire into the future. So that 17,000 acre fire, which to me seems big and did seem big in 2004, is pretty small by our scales today. So the Forest Service is looking at new ways of doing work. And I think Regine will come up and speak, but Regine Miller with CHIPS is really a key partner that we have. And I would say the Forest Service, through our regional forester, Randy Moore, has been directing people like me, a district ranger, to look at other ways of doing business. And we're doing that through partnerships. And the Wildlife Conservation Board is a partner, CHIPS is a partner, but we have several others like the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Mule Deer Foundation, National Wild Turkey Federation, and others we've been working with. So I think that's really going to be the key to success, looking for unique funding sources like this to supplement our federal funds, and also looking at additional partners that want to work on the public lands to get this work done, just to increase the pace and scale. And just to give you a quick measure of that, then I'll turn it over to Regine. We have an ecological restoration leadership intent. It's been in place for about 8 or 9 years now. And the goal is to have 500,000 acres per year, which I believe matches CAL FIRE's as well. So we're only about halfway there in Region 5 of the Forest Service in California. So we have a long ways to go, and someone like me is doing a really great job to try to get a lot of work done on the landscape, look for new ways of doing it, and it's really exciting to be here in front of you and asking for your help in getting this work done. So thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Our next speaker card is Regine.
Hi, good morning. I'm Regine Miller. I work as the Executive Director for Calaveras Healthy Impact Product Solutions, CHIPS. For those of you who aren't familiar, we're a small nonprofit based in the town of West Point in Calaveras County. Our community and many of the others in the surrounding Blue Mountain region have been hit hard by the timber industry collapse. Our organization formed about 15 years ago with the intent to try to lift up the people in our community, to not only restore the local communities, but also the surrounding environment, and to boost the local economy. We're working to reestablish, or rather establish, a forest economy based upon restoration and stewardship. And as part of that, we have crews that work across 6 different counties doing primarily hand thinning, but also other types of forest restoration work. We have several partners, including the El Dorado National Forest, in addition to other national forests, Yosemite National Park, Bureau of Land Management, and we also work for private forested landowners. Needless to say, we're really excited about the opportunity that the WCB funding program presents to our organization. This grant will provide us a leg up in helping to boost our community, improve the local forested habitat, and at the same time allow for us to control our own destiny. Through this grant, we will be able to hire local contractors to implement the forest restoration work, which is very meaningful to us in that we're creating new local economic opportunities to those in disadvantaged communities. So thank you for that. I think, as Rick mentioned, this project is part of a larger effort. Work under this grant includes treating over 1,900 acres. It's adjacent to other lands that are being treated by the El Dorado National Forest, the Upper Mokelumne River Watershed Authority, and then also our organization under existing contracts and agreements with the Forest Service and another grant that we have with the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. So taken together, these efforts really create a very impactful landscape scale approach to forest restoration. Lastly, I just wanted to make mention that we see this as, this project has been an outgrowth of CHIPS's partnerships that we've established through the Amador Calaveras Consensus Group All Lands Forest Collaborative. We see this project as an opportunity to establish a replicable model for, as Rick mentioned, finding sort of innovative ways to treat, to conserve and restore forest lands, aside from sort of the traditional models that have been used in the past. So thank you very much for your consideration and for the opportunity to work with you on this project.
Thank you. Any questions? I'll make a motion to approve the project as proposed. All in favor?
Great, thank you. Thank you, Judah.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item number 42. The Yosemite Area Forest Restoration Project. This is also a forest project. Consider a grant to the Mariposa County Resource Conservation District. Judah will also be presenting this project to you this morning.
While IT helped set it up and we see the coconut again. Yeah, somebody's great vacation. Just for awareness sake, we're at the 12 o'clock hour. We agendaed this until 1, and we've got a few projects still to get through. And we're going to have an executive closed session right at the end, from which we'll return and then adjourn out the meeting. So.
Okay, keep moving.
I didn't say that. I was just awareness.
Okay, this proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to Mariposa County Resource Conservation District for a cooperative project with Sierra National Forest and Yosemite National Park to enhance forest health and reduce hazardous fuels through selective thinning, prescribed fire, and replanting activities on 1,000 acres of mixed conifer forest in Sierra National Forest and Yosemite National Park in Madera and Mariposa counties. I just want to mention also that this project and the two prior were also selected through the 2019 Forest Conservation Program, which was funded by Prop 68. A couple landmarks on this map while we have it up. So the project area is here, and you can see the city of Merced in the valley and Mariposa up in the foothills. And this inset map shows that the project area actually overlaps both Yosemite National Park to the north and Sierra National Forest to the south. So unfortunately, this area too has been subject to drought, beetle bark, and as a result has a high degree of tree mortality, which has resulted in increased fire risk and where those fires do touch down, catastrophic results. In anticipated global climate change scenarios with temperature increases, tree mortality would also increase and fire risk would go up as well, exacerbating these conditions. The CAL FIRE data also supports this conclusion. You can see the fire hazard severity zone, and this project falls entirely within the very high fire hazard severity zone. This map shows some fire history to the area. The purple area is Yosemite National Park, and the green is Sierra National Forest. The project area are these darker brown colors. The gray shaded areas are previously burned areas. So the important things to take out of this is that there's a lot of fire in this area. But despite having a lot of fire in this area, there's a lot of unburned area as well. So there are tens of thousands of acres of these dense forests with high tree mortality that haven't burned in over a century. So the fire risk here is extreme. This proposed project, through thinning these hazardous fuels and recovering some of the burned areas, would help protect both the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias, the disadvantaged communities in Wawona and Fish Camp, and also help protect wildlife habitat, including Pacific fisher and California spotted owl habitat. This is an example of some of these overcrowded forests, and you can imagine that these ladder fuels provide a pathway for those fires to climb vertically and start those catastrophic crown fires. Now, one thing I want you to note here and compare it to the next slide is how far you can see into this forest, which isn't very far. And this is an example from Yosemite National Park where some treatments have been conducted, and these are the target conditions that the project would pursue. So a diverse landscape, species richness, widely spaced trees that would help reduce fire risk. And that's what this project would aim to do. So staff recommends the project as proposed. I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have. And in the audience today, we have Melinda Barrett representing the Mariposa County Resource Conservation District and Denise Ptolemy representing Sierra National Forest.
And then just for the record, we did receive letters of support from Mr. John Buckley, Executive Director of the Central Sierra Environmental Resource Center, Tom Wheeler, Supervisor, 5th District, Madera County Board of Supervisors, Mike Manentre, Supervisor, 5th District, Mariposa County Board of Supervisors, and then Susan Britting, Executive Director of the Mariposa County RCD.
Any questions for Judy?
This is just a question, just a short comment, just that both this project and the one before, I just wanted to note that in our strategic plan update that fire resiliency and forest management for those purposes was identified as a priority. And so I'm just pleased to see both of these projects on the agenda.
We don't have any speaker cards. Anyone in the public want to comment on this item? I'll make a second. All in favor?
Aye. Great, thank you. Thank you, Judah.
Thank you.
Right, item number 43, the San Vicente Redwood Public Access and Trails Project. This is to consider a grant to the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County. Miss Heather McIntyre and our staff will present the project to you. And then I did receive letters of support, sorry, Heather, but Mr. Bill Moaning, Senator of 17th District, and Mr. Mark Stone, Assembly Member of the 29th District.
Thank you. Thank you, John, and good morning, board members. I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to talk about the 2019 public access proposal solicitation notice process that we've had. Oh, perfect. Prop 68 provided some additional funds to our 2019 program. We went from a $1 million annual budget to $5 million. So that was pretty exciting for us. And in the 2019 solicitation, we highlighted or emphasized boating projects, hunting and fishing projects, wildlife recreation, and accessibility. We went through a competitive process that was very similar to what Josh described earlier, so I won't tell you more about that unless you have any specific requests. In late June, the public access solicitation was announced on the WCB website, and we also sent an announcement to 800 interested parties. We received 42 pre-applications, and of those, we requested full applications from 22 applicants. That was more than $12 million in WCB asks. 10 of these projects will be brought before the board for funding consideration. Yeah.
That right there, 10 selected for funding out of 42 pre-applications. How does that compare with other programs we have, funding programs we have in terms of
I can't address that question. I can tell you that we were really surprised with the sheer volume that we received and the quality of the applications that we received, but I'm sorry, I can't speak to how it compares to other programs. Is there anyone else? There we go.
Yeah, this is pretty common for it. I know when our very first one that we did was the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. That was not Proposition 1, that was really our first one. We had 115 pre-applications, and we whittled it down to probably, I think, 20-ish projects, but we go from a pre-app phase, which is really big and broad, funnel it down to suggesting full applications. And my own personal view, I don't think we have a policy on it, is you kind of want a better than 50% success rate if someone's going to fill out a full application, so it's not a total waste of their time. Well, that's not a total waste of their time, but you get the feeling of it. But yeah, anyway, that's fairly common. I think James's program was very similar with the Flyway.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, just thinking about it right now, I would say 20 to 25% of all of the programs that we've put solicitations out for, we've funded. So there's about a 75% range that we're not capitalizing on. Yeah, it's close.
we're oversubscribed across the board?
Yeah. Thank you both for assisting with that question.
Which is another reason why I would predict this board keeps going in continuity.
Yeah. So of the 10 projects that we will be bringing before the board for funding consideration, they range from Humboldt County up on top all the way down to Los Angeles and Orange counties to the south. We have a project as far east as Placer County out at Lake Tahoe, and then all the way out to San Luis Obispo County as well. So we were very pleased with the geographic range of our projects this time. 5 of them are planning projects, and those planning projects are indicated here with the white markers. 5 of our projects are implementation projects, and those are the blue markers. Of the projects that we're bringing forward, 4 of them had motorized or non-motorized boating access components, which was wonderful. 3 of them provide fishing access. 4 provide hiking trails. All of them have some form of an ADA component, which is great, and 3 of them are in disadvantaged communities. So we were very pleased with the projects that we're moving forward. And I look forward to bringing these to the board, which leads us to our first project. Sure.
Can you remind me again how you define disadvantaged communities? Do you use the CalEnviro screen, or what data point do you use?
There is a program, I believe it's on the DWR website. Is that right? And so maybe someone can back me up here. That applicants go to and put in their project location, and it evaluates it from there. Any other questions on the process?
I have a quick one. So you said there's a percentage that are planning and there's a percentage that are implementation. Do we typically see the planning projects come back for implementation funding later?
That is the intent.
Okay.
Is that we would like to see those projects come back to us as implementation projects, shovel ready and ready to go.
Great.
Thank you. Any other questions on the process? All right, thank you. So San Vicente Redwoods. Moving on. This proposal is to consider the allocation of a grant to the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County for a cooperative project with the Peninsula Open Space Trust and Sempervirens Fund to build public access trails and improvements on 2 properties, the San Vicente property, Redwoods property, and Laguna Tract, both in Santa Cruz County. The site is located between the communities of Davenport and Bonnie Doon. People need opportunities to be in natural areas. Being outside improves health, well-being, and inspires people to become conservation advocates. 3.5 million people live in highly urbanized areas within a 40-mile radius of the San Vicente Trailhead. This project provides access to the heart of the Santa Cruz Mountains with areas of redwood forests, chaparral, and oak madrone woodlands. At full build-out, we anticipate this project to bring in more than 100,000 visitors for hiking, biking, horseback riding, dog walking, and more. This project provides needed public access to nature while protecting ecosystems and working lands. The project location is special. It is part of a larger land acquisition providing more than 27,000 acres of contiguous protected lands. This project will develop the first 10 of 38 planned miles of trails with sweeping ocean views, cascading streams, and redwood canyons. The project will build 8.5 miles on the San Vicente location that you can see here. See it right here. Nope. Oh, there's the San Vicente location, and then another 1.5 miles up here at the Laguna Tract location. The trail layout and management approach were carefully designed to protect the wildlife resources while still providing access. And a project of this magnitude has many dedicated partners, as you can see. In 2011, WCB granted the Save the Redwoods more than $10 million to purchase a conservation easement that included the San Vicente Redwoods. Specifically, this project will build 10 miles of trails, including a mile-long accessible trail, many small trail bridges, interpretive and wayfinding signage, a parking lot with ADA parking stalls, an ADA-compliant restroom, upgrades to an existing service road so that it can accommodate emergency vehicles, an emergency call box, and water tanks for firefighting. Staff recommends the board approve this project as proposed and authorize staff to proceed as substantially planned. We have in the audience today Brian Largay with the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm with you on that one. You'll probably get tired of hearing this question from me, but on the signage, is it anticipated or can we incorporate multilingual signage given that we're trying to attract 3.5 million people?
Absolutely. And I'm getting a very strong head nod from
Great.
Mr. Largay, so I would say yes, we can work with that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We do not have speaker cards. Does anyone in the public want to comment on this project? I'll make a motion to approve the project as proposed. All in favor? Aye.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, staying in the area.
Yes, item number 44, the Carmel River Floodplain Restoration and Enhancement Project. This is to consider a grant to the Monterey County Resource Conservation Management Agency. Ms. Kara Allen on our staff will present the project to you. Kara.
Thank you. Agenda item 44 is a proposal to consider the allocation of $2.5 million to Monterey County for a multi-benefit floodplain and habitat restoration project in Monterey County, about 1 mile south of Carmel by the Sea. This is a cooperative project with the Department of Water Resources and the State Coastal Conservancy, as well as the 3 landowners, which include California State Parks, the Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District, and the Big Sur Land Trust. The project site is situated on the southern side of the lower Carmel River, about a half-mile upstream from the river's mouth at the Pacific Ocean, and extends upriver for approximately 1 mile. The 135-acre project site flanks both sides of Highway 1, immediately upstream of the Carmel River Lagoon, which you can see in the smaller inset map on this slide. The Carmel River is one of the most important streams in coastal Monterey County due to its historical, ecological, and social significance. It provides critical habitat for special status species, including the California red-legged frog and steelhead trout, and is the primary source of drinking water for the Monterey Peninsula. Over time, agricultural, commercial, and residential development, along with levee construction and the elevated embankment supporting Highway 1, have limited the river's ability to flow across its natural floodplain, which has dramatically altered the hydrologic function of the lower Carmel River watershed. This image is from 1972 when farming operations were active along the lower Carmel River. And just so that you know what you are looking at, I have highlighted the river corridor in blue and the general project area in red. For nearly a century, this reach of the river has been confined by levees to reduce the frequency of flooding into the adjoining farm fields and to protect the commercial and residential land uses on the north side of the river. Recent land transfers, though, have dedicated the farmlands to open space, which provides us the opportunity to reconnect the river with its historical floodplain to the south. And this aerial image is of the lower Carmel River watershed as it exists now, and how the project site, circled in red, is literally a core linkage that will bring together previous WCB investments into a comprehensive lower watershed scale project that increases habitat and biodiversity and restores the hydrologic function and connectivity between the river, floodplain, and lagoon. The project will also provide public access opportunities that never existed on this land before. And this map shows the
Can I just make a comment on that last slide? And one more really important project on this river that was completed a couple years ago was the removal of the San Clemente Dam, completed. And it's off this slide, but it's just upstream of that last star on the top, which was very important.
Yeah, so to pile on, this is, to me, a watershed that illustrates the example of a variety of partners from almost the headwaters to the ocean over time can make investments that put it all together and restore a landscape.
Thank you. Okay, so this map shows the 3 components of the project that include the new Highway 1 causeway that's shaded in purple, notching on the South Bank levee that's shaded in blue, and then the floodplain construction and habitat restoration area shaded in green. The project will not be funding activities associated with the Highway 1 causeway, but I will mention that the floodplain grading that's shaded in green will extend to the west side of Highway 1 in order to connect the floodplain to the Carmel River Lagoon. And then this image is a zoomed in version of the project boundary I just showed you, but it has the project design laid over it. And if you follow along with the graphics, I will walk you through how the various components come together to form a multi-benefit project. So first, the entire 135-acre site will be graded to construct the floodplain and tie into the south arm of the Carmel River Lagoon. Then sections of the South Bank levee will be removed to redirect flood flows into the adjoining floodplain via the braided distributary channels. And then the floodplain will be reconnected to the Carmel River Lagoon by allowing water to flow freely through the new causeway along Highway 1, which again, WCB is not funding, but this is a very important project of the project, or an important part of the project. And finally, the floodplain will be restored with native grasses, riparian, and coastal scrub communities. The project also includes a trail that will connect the restored floodplain to adjoining state and regional parks, and will honor the legacy of coastal agriculture by preserving a 23-acre agricultural preserve on the south side of the project. And finally, this is a list of the activities that the project will be funding, which includes 100% designs for the floodplain construction. 65% designs have already been completed. Floodplain construction on 135 acres that will include clearing, grading, and excavating the adjoining old farm fields, notching the levee in 5 places, and salvaging riparian trees. Additionally, as part of the floodplain construction, the 23-acre agricultural preserve will be elevated and the trail alignments will be constructed. And a habitat restoration plan will be prepared for 80 acres on the constructed floodplain. And implementation of the initial 40 acres of habitat restoration will occur and will be supported by an irrigation system, pilot plantings, and adaptive management practices. Staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board adopt the written findings for the environmental impact report that was filed for the project by the County of Monterey, approve the project as proposed, and authorize staff to proceed substantially as planned. And in the audience today, we have Melanie Beretti with the Resource Management Agency of Monterey County, and Rachel Saunders, Director of Conservation for the Big Sur Land Trust.
I'll make 2 more arguments related to the project. First, this project, in my mind, is climate resiliency and adaptation. It is the interface between the ocean environment, a riverine environment, and a coastal plateau. And this kind of redesign is about resiliency in my mind. And if you imagine when it's successful, the precedent it could serve, given how many other estuaries one goes through from Oregon to Mexico. So, any questions for staff?
Can I make one more point? I'm like you, Chuck. I got to make one more point that's really important to the overall success of this project, and it was WCB's participation in purchasing a golf course just upstream of this site where the water rights that were diverted out of the Carmel River to water the golf course were retired, and so that water is able to go back into the river for which it's going to flow through this. And it was significant. I forget the amount of acre feet of water, but it was significant.
It was 185 acre feet of water, and it also protected 185 acres of floodplain habitat.
And I believe you approved that under the stream flow enhancement program. So, we're tying it all together.
I had an opportunity a year or so ago to tour part of this with Department of State Parks, and we were fortunate enough to see snowy plovers nesting on the beach there too. So it's a great multi-agency and multi-purpose project.
We have 2 speaker cards. The first is Melanie Beretti.
Just wanted the opportunity to thank you for your consideration and real support for this project, and to also just send kudos to your staff for how they've worked with us and really supported us to get this brought forward to you today. Thanks.
And our second speaker card is Rachel Saunders.
Yes, good afternoon. Rachel Saunders with the Big Sur Land Trust. Echo Melanie's comments about our deep gratitude to the Wildlife Conservation Board for all you've invested in this geography. The Carmel River is where it's at. We also see this project as a bookend to the work in the upper watershed. We're also excited to collaborate with our friends a little bit further upstream who are restoring the golf course there and learning from one another. The Land Trust has been involved with this project since very early concepts in the early 2000s. We've hung in there for a long time. You've hung in there for a long time. We appreciate it. It's complicated. We refer to it as a Rubik's Cube of a project, and getting all the pieces to line up. But we've made tremendous progress. This grant will help greatly. We've also been able to raise private funding as an important match. We set up a Carmel River Stewardship Fund at a local community foundation. We've raised $2 million, which was our goal. That will help the Land Trust be able to adaptively manage a large portion of the site. So again, thank you so much. We appreciate your support, and it was a pleasure to work with your staff. Thank you.
Any questions? I'll make a motion to approve the project as proposed. All in favor?
Aye. Thank you, Kara. Okay, item number 45, and just a quick time check. I think we have 40 minutes left, at least what has been set aside for the meeting. So with that, we're going to go to Toro Creek. This is a project that will be presented by Joe Navari on our staff. Joe.
Thank you, John. This proposal is to consider an allocation for a grant to the San Luis Obispo County Parks Department for a cooperative project with the Conservancy of San Luis Obispo County, the Trust for Public Land to acquire, and the Trust for Public Land to acquire 258 acres for the protection of coastal sage shrub, native grasslands, the Toro Creek watershed, beach habitat, and to enhance wildlife linkages and provide potential future beach-related public opportunity and uses. So Toro Creek is basically, the project is basically located at the intersection of Highway 1 and Toro Creek Road in San Luis Obispo County between the community of Cayucas and Morro Bay, right on Highway 1. The Highway 1 bisects the property, kind of. So the beach section of property is to the west of the highway, while the upland section is to the east. The property is currently owned by the Chevron Corporation, who has allowed public access to the beach section of the property for many years. The community has adopted it as their dog beach, so many people recreate on the beach already. Walking dogs, hiking, surfing, fishing, that sort of thing go on there. The property is being purchased by the San Luis Obispo County Parks Department for a total appraised value of $4,165,000 and is being split 4 ways. The Wildlife Conservation Board is proposing to contribute $1,450,000. The State Coastal Conservancy, $1 million. The Resources Agency, $1 million, and Chevron is committed to a $415,000 bargain sale. Land acquisition evaluation has been done to evaluate the project for funding with Proposition 68 funds. The acquisition of the Toro Creek will provide continued public access to the coastal beach and the uplands above the beach. The project will protect the incredible viewshed found from the eastern side of Highway 1. Typical habitat types found on Toro Creek property include riparian woodlands, coastal sage scrub, sandy beach, and both native and annual grasslands. Toro Creek contains substantial habitat for the threatened Central Coast steelhead, and the beach habitat is known to harbor endangered tidewater gobies as well. The common plant species occurring on the site include blue oaks, coastal live oak, cottonwood, silver lupine, blue blossoms, and hummingbird sage. Common animals include black-tailed deer, coyotes, gray fox, California quail, and many other bird and reptile species. As you can see from this picture, it's a really good, shows the project really well with that kind of grassy hill is the eastern side of the project and the beach section, the lower part with Highway 1 splitting it. The county Parks Department has been working for a long time to build a trail between Cayucas and Morro Bay. It's the hiking, biking trail, and this is the last piece of property they need to finalize that trail that they're planning. So this is basically creating a green belt between Morro Bay and Cayucas, and these green belts are pretty good for genetic diversity of wildlife linkages and that sort of thing. Based on these things, we recommend the project be approved as proposed. In the audience today, we have John Bernstein from the Trust for Public Land in support of the project as well.
I just want to make a comment real quick. I think you mentioned it was 1,450,000 from WCB. I think we're recommending 1,750,000.
Yes, that's correct.
That was one of my questions. question. I was like, wait a minute, where's this other money going? I did have another quick question around Chevron. What Chevron used the property for in the past?
This part of the property was always used for grazing. Just to the south and east of here, they actually stored oil in large reservoir, or I guess you call them tanks. They were on the hill that's right outside of this picture. You can't really see it. Chevron's now working on the cleanup of that area, which is not included in this part of the acquisition, but could be in future acquisitions. Sure.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, for the acquisition, Chevron's not going to retain any mineral rights or anything, right?
That's correct.
We're going to be okay. They're not going to come back to the land.
Actually, Chevron actually does not own the mineral rights on this property, uniquely enough. They're owned by a different party.
Oh, okay. Are the mineral rights, so yeah, are the mineral rights contemplated to be part of this acquisition as well?
Not right now. We have done basically a mineral remoteness on this property.
A mineral
remoteness survey by a geologist to basically see if there's any chance that there could be mining or anything on this property. There really is not. The property was used by Chevron for basically unloading barges that had oil into these tanks before. There wasn't actually any mineral extraction going on here.
Even though adjacent to this property, they were
adjacent
pumping oil?
Yeah.
Or doing,
not from the ground, though.
Or they were
no.
storing.
They were storing.
I thought you said they're doing a clean. Oh, so the cleanup was from the storage.
From the storage,
got
yes.
Got
yes.
it. Okay.
And who does own the mineral properties? Who does own the mineral properties?
I can't remember off the top of my head right now. I believe it's another oil company that is other than Chevron. It could be Standard Oil or American or something else. But I can't remember off it. I'd have to look at the title report.
How do you impact?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Hey, Colin, could you describe the remoteness?
Yeah,
survey process?
so as part of all of our acquisitions for both fee and conservation easement purchases, we followed the Department of Fish and Wildlife's mineral policy that they developed relative to acquiring conservation interests in lands. And as part of that, anytime that there's a severed mineral interest, meaning that the surface owner does not own the underlying minerals, so that would not be a component of the acquisition, we hire a geologist to determine whether there is a likelihood of extraction potential on the property. So when you hear the term remoteness opinion, what that is that's a mineral assessment report that concludes that the possibility of extraction on the property is remote. And once we get to that point pursuant to the department's policy, then we have the green light to go forward with the acquisition, understanding that we have confidence that the underlying severed mineral estate will not impact the long-term conservation values of the surface of the property.
What if that oil company, did decide to come back and explore / pursue extraction? What would that mean for this project?
So legally, any holder of a mineral estate has, unless they're constrained by a deed when they acquired those mineral estates, but just generally applicable legal rules, if you own the mineral estate, you have an implied right to go onto the surface of the property to conduct your extraction activities. With that being said, all counties, I believe outside of maybe one in the state of California, require a permitting process as part of extraction activities. So even assuming that the mineral holder would try to conduct those activities, they would go through a permitting process that would include CEQA compliance and things of that nature. So there is sort of a backstop, albeit there is no ability for the surface owner to prevent that. There are regulatory processes available that would evaluate the impact of those activities through the permitting process.
I just have another question. Given that the adjacent property is under cleanup. Chevron's doing cleanup activities, I assume through DTSC or some other agency. Has the analysis been done on this site on whether or not there is any potential remediation required, or is the site clean?
The site is clean. We did an environmental assessment of the site.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. These answers are really helpful.
Just one quick. With regard to the Toro Creek Dog Beach, do you know if the management plan is to continue to allow public access for the dog beach for dogs?
It is.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know, whether it helps or not, but this remoteness process described really came about because the department was struggling with similar challenges and needed a certifiable way to confirm it was just unlikely. While the rights may exist, we could conclude it would be unlikely someone would ever exercise those rights. Now, I understand that's not a complete guarantee, but the idea of managing all the respective subsurface rights is potentially cost prohibitive, and in many cases with these properties, it's very challenging to trace back who may hold them. So for us, we created this remoteness process as a measure of insulation there.
And I think it's a great process. We don't want to stop the important conservation that needs to happen, and I think that's important. But having some sort of a threshold where we understand the risk that we're taking is great. Seems like a great project.
I think just to add to that, it'd be great to just have that level of due diligence in the report, because I think it's especially given when, the fact that Chevron is the owner, there were activities on the site, even if it wasn't drilling, but it'd be great to know that the site is clean, that, there is this remoteness determination on the mineral rights, and just so we understand that due diligence was done, I think.
So to express it differently, at this point, I think board staff should have a pretty good flavor for the inquisitive nature of the board overall and can anticipate likely questions it's going to get. And you mentioned Chevron in a description, you can predict you're going to get questions. So be prepared.
My top question we were just sidebarring was, why didn't they just donate the property? But I know it's
we don't have any speaker cards on this. Any more questions?
Mary and I will go for public comment.
Okay, seeing no other questions.
Motion to approve.
Great. We have a second? Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Great, thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 46, the Hanning Flat project. This is to consider a project in Monterey, or not Monterey, but San Luis Obispo, no, Kern County, I'm sorry. I was too back. Kern County, for a project with several organizations, including the Trust for Public Land, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Mr. Daniel Vasquez on our staff will present the project. Daniel?
Thank you, John. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to the Trust for Public Land to acquire in fee 3,804 acres of land for the protection of threatened and endangered species, wildlife corridors, habitat linkages, watersheds, and to provide future wildlife-oriented public use opportunities. The property is located near the southern end of the Sierra Nevada mountain range, approximately 3 miles northwest of the community of Weldon in northeastern Kern County. It is next to CDFW's Canebrake Ecological Reserve and BLM's Cyrus Canyon Area of Critical Environmental Concern. So if you notice on the map, here's the BLM, area of critical environmental concern. Here's Canebrake Ecological Reserve, the department's, the property's right in between, so it actually, ensures that connectivity. The property is an undeveloped, irregular shaped tract of land with elevations varying from 2,700 to 4,850 feet above sea level. The lower elevations are a large flat expanse that is gradually sloping and is framed on 3 sides by hills and steep canyons. The project will achieve several public benefit objectives, including enhancing wildlife habitat and wildlife corridors threatened by development, improving the health of Fay Creek and South Fork Kern River watersheds, expanding recreational opportunities for visitors in nearby disadvantaged communities, and providing critical resilience to climate change and wildfire. Now, I know Alina asked earlier about determining how do we determine disadvantaged communities. We use a threshold created by Climate Change Initiative, CCI, or GGRF funding. I don't have those totals or what those thresholds are off the top of my head, but it's also what DWR created, that map that Heather, my coworker, used earlier. So that's the basis for that. Plant communities on the property include chaparral, scrub, and shade sedge habitats, and woodlands of blue oak, foothill pine, juniper, and montane hardwood. It contains at least 3 springs with year-round surface water and several intermittent stream corridors. The property has been recognized as a priority in CDFW's Canebrake Conceptual Area Protection Plan. The primary purpose of this CAP is to protect riparian and wetland habitat, threatened and endangered species habitat, adjoining buffer areas, and wildlife corridors to create a viable and sustainable protection landscape in central Kern County. If this project is approved, the property will be owned and managed by the Kern River Valley Heritage Foundation and will be incorporated into its collection of protected lands in the vicinity. The foundation will incorporate the property into its existing management plan and permit intermittent grazing and public access on the property. Staff recommends approval of the project as proposed. In the audience is Alex Size, representing the Trust for Public Land.
Any questions for staff?
Just a comment. I think when I would like, again, for better understanding, when we're saying that the project will serve disadvantaged communities, I would like to just understand what that means,
So
just in terms of like both, you know, racial, ethnic, youth, income, just to have or some kind of a profile on what that means, because I'm looking things up on my phone and not clear exactly how that definition is fitting in. So
Okay, to actually kind of where we get the basis for that definition. Yeah, I could include that. It's something that really came about or kind of came to our attention more with the GGRF funds and through the climate change.
So there, I mean, you know that there are a variety of places in code and agency program where it's defined. And duly noted, we haven't done well today telling you exactly which definition we're using.
Yeah, and there's 2 different types of severely disadvantaged communities and disadvantaged communities. So it's just a different income threshold. It's not necessarily, you know, ethnic makeup and stuff like that. And it's the proximity to those communities. So, you know, Weldon and it's in the Lake Isabella community areas that falls within those thresholds. This property is within that threshold, and it's also easily accessible for public to access these communities here. And the grantee is intending for public to access that property and develop. There's already existing roads networks on there, and developing those into trails and hiking, and it also provides access to the neighboring properties, BLM properties in Canebrake Ecological Reserve.
yeah, and that's, I mean, it's music to my ears on the public access. So I think it's wonderful. I just want to be clear, and I understand the different definitions and data points that are used. It just would be great to have, because I see it presented in a couple of the board reports, just to better understand.
Sure. We can include the thresholds.
You know, what the profile is and what we're targeting. Yeah.
Okay.
And it might be, to my colleague's point, it might be helpful. There are a couple different versions of definitions we have out there in the world, and it's used for different things based on what the purpose is, right? There's like a park access, outdoor access. There's like pollution-based piece that's from GGRF. So just understanding, which we're using. Maybe it's the next meeting and why we're using that version.
This one was based off the income in the neighboring
Income
communities.
levels.
Yes, income levels.
Okay, yeah, okay. And then the other comment I just have is it's great to see a project in this community. The community of Kern really deserves this work. And I'm excited to see more projects and sort of get into some of these projects in Southern California.
Just to add just a little on that is that in some cases, I think maybe what you were alluding to is that the criteria that's used is mandated by the fund source that's funding the project. So that could be specified in the staff report too, you know, because it may not be that the board has a choice on what definition they use. If Prop 68 says this is the definition of severely disadvantaged that you'll use for this projects that are funded by this fund source, but yeah.
Yeah, I could do a better job of including that in the presentation so that you're aware of it.
Yeah, and just to point out, this particular project is being funded under the Habitat Conservation Fund, which began in the procedures and guidelines for the Habitat Conservation Fund preceded the Prop 68, the Prop 1 disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged community considerations. So we are taking, you know, the disadvantaged community, severely disadvantaged community into consideration in all of our projects, irrespective of whether or not the fund source specifically requires it. And we can definitely report out in the agenda items how that was arrived at and what kind of qualifications or criteria we use to consider the designation.
Great. We have 2 speaker cards on this item. The first is Alex Size.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and board members. My name is Alex Size. I am the Southern California Land Protection Director for the Trust for Public Land. Just want to say thank you for your attention to the Southern Sierras. It's an area you guys supported last year with the acquisition of the Desert Springs parcels, which are now in the safe hands of the Mojave Desert Land Trust and the Kern River Valley Heritage Foundation. This property will also go to the Kern River Valley Heritage Foundation. They are a burgeoning land trust in the Southern Sierras. We feel very confident they'll do a good job with public access on the property. This is, I think, the 3rd property they're going to own in fee and are very excited. Actually, the executive director was going to be here, but he actually got into a motorcycle accident over the weekend, so our thoughts are with him this morning. Also, my supervisor, Dave Sutton, was also going to be here. He is sick with the cold, so he sends his apologies. But in general, I appreciate the conversation about the mineral rights on the past project and appreciate your support there. We also got a mineral remoteness opinion on this property. It came back with the language we wanted to see. Obviously, we're not looking at oil here, but mines for mineral extraction. So that document came back clean as well. So appreciate that conversation as well as the disadvantaged community conversation. This is a severely disadvantaged community based on lower incomes at the state level. So appreciate the Land Trust kind of standing up and providing public access for this property, and appreciate your attention on this area of the state, and happy to answer any questions you all may have.
And our next speaker is a colleague from Audubon.
Good afternoon, Juan Altamirano with Audubon, California. Thank you for the consideration for this project. This is a really important project in terms of ecological preservation. The project is located on a site that is globally important to a globally important bird area, and it'll create a large connectivity project, especially in that area of the state, which is traditionally not seen as, it's like almost flyover or drive over country. And so I think that this is going to create that important habitat to protect many endangered and threatened climate bird species. So thank you for that.
Any questions? Make a second. All in favor?
Great, thanks. Thank you, Daniel. Item number 47.
Still in Kern County.
Still in Kern County. This is the Tricolored Blackbird Wetland Habitat Enhancement Project. If you recall, this has been on the agenda a couple times and was withdrawn. But we are here today to present this project to you, and James Croft on our staff will present this project to you.
Thank you, John. Sorry to bring up disadvantaged communities again, but just to clarify for you guys, for our Proposition 68 grant programs, we used the disadvantaged community mapping tool. It's called the disadvantaged community mapping tool, hosted on DWR's website, which was taken from data collected in the 2016 census. And it's just a spatial layer that's overlaid on our project maps, and we determine whether our project areas are within those either disadvantaged places, blocks, or tracts. And the income thresholds for those for a disadvantaged community has a median household income less than 80% of the statewide median household income, and a severely disadvantaged community has a median household income of less than 60% of the statewide median household income. You can find that with a quick Google search on DWR's website. All right. Very happy to finally be presenting this to you for funding consideration, and thank you very much for being patient. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to Ducks Unlimited Incorporated for a cooperative project with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Audubon, California, and the Lawrence Duck Club to enhance wetlands that provide tricolored blackbird nesting habitat and waterfowl breeding habitat located on privately owned land in Kern County. The project is located within the Lawrence Duck Club, which is comprised of 2 properties in Kern County. Lawrence East, a 130-acre parcel located 2 miles east of Kern National Wildlife Refuge, and Lawrence de Lorenzo, a 43-acre parcel which is adjacent to Kern National Wildlife Refuge, right across the street. Both properties are comprised of seasonal and semi-permanent emergent wetlands that are utilized by waterbirds, shorebirds, waterfowl, and their broods. The properties are generally flat, with the exception of small levees to retain seasonal water in ponds and swales to move water across the wetlands. The properties are adjacent to Poso Creek, a seasonal floodway of the Kern River. Historically, the Lawrence de Lorenzo property was a pig farm before the current owners purchased the land in 2015, restored the wetlands, and began managing it as a duck club. Lawrence East has been managed as a duck club since the 1960s, with the current owners managing the property since 1998. No WCB projects have occurred on either property. The landowners are currently partnering with the Natural Resources Conservation Service to provide spring water for tricolored blackbird habitat. Both properties are protected by a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conservation easement. Tricolored blackbird are nearly endemic to the state of California, with the majority of the breeding population occurring in the Central Valley. Habitat loss, including wetland habitat and grassland habitat important for foraging, has led to long-term population declines across the Central Valley. Tricolored blackbird numbered in the millions in the 1930s and nested in colonies of up to 250,000 birds. In 2017, the statewide survey documented approximately 178,000 tricolored blackbird. With growing uncertainty of water availability throughout the state, the wetland habitat that tricolored blackbird rely on for establishing nesting colonies is becoming scarcer. As a result, many tricolored blackbird now utilize dairy farm silage fields for nesting, leading to direct conflict between harvesting of the silage and active nesting. Considered a California species of special concern since 1992, tricolored blackbird was designated as a state-listed threatened species under the California Endangered Species Act in 2019. This listing emphasizes the importance to restore critical habitat, as well as protect and enhance existing tricolored blackbird habitat throughout the Central Valley in support of the species conservation. The project is a collaboration aimed at meeting 2 objectives: providing tricolored blackbird nesting habitat and providing breeding waterfowl habitat. These 2 objectives will be met through water infrastructure improvements and installation of solar arrays. For the wetland enhancement at Lawrence de Lorenzo property, a solar array will be installed at a pre-selected site. A sump will be constructed to collect all irrigation and drainage water, and water from the sump will be recirculated with a new-tail water pump. Recirculated water will be pumped back into an existing brood pond and into a newly constructed brood pond. The brood pond will expand the wetland footprint by 3 acres. These brood ponds are critically important for waterfowl and their young in order to provide refugia from predators, as well as to help them get through the wing molt season when they may become flightless for a few weeks. The Lawrence East wetland enhancement will consist of installation of a solar array and construction of a 58-acre seasonal wetland. This wetland will be supplied with water by a new pipeline from an existing well, complementing the existing seasonal wetlands. The solar array on both properties will support the operation of the pumps that supply water to maintain wetlands managed for tricolored blackbird waterfowl, and waterbirds. Staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed. In the audience today to help answer any questions you may have is Mr. Matt Kaminsky, Regional Biologist from Ducks Unlimited. Thank you.
Any questions for staff? We have one speaker card. It's, again, our representative from Audubon. Juan, I don't know if you want to. Okay. He cedes to Ducks Unlimited.
Juan is ceding to me, Jeronimo Castañeda, also with Audubon.
Okay.
I am the lead project manager for tricolored blackbirds throughout the state. I want to thank you for considering this project. It's been a long time in the making, and we're really excited about the capacity to improve efficiency and infrastructure on this property to provide the much needed habitat that the tricolored blackbirds need for nesting. As James mentioned, because of the vast loss of wetland habitat, in particular over the summer and spring, the tricolored blackbirds have started nesting on dairy silage farms, and that has posed a really big conflict with those landowners. And so Audubon, working with a whole bunch of different partners, not only Ducks Unlimited and WCB, but through other programs, we work with NRCS and other federal and state agencies to provide and come up with solutions to offset those impacts to the dairy farmers. And one of them is to work with private wetland owners to improve their habitat to provide this critical nesting substrate to the birds. Yeah, and with that, I thank you for considering this project.
Well, shout out to you and Audubon. I don't think all the board members realize it's probably 2 years ago, a pretty contentious dynamic, whether this particular bird should be protected under state law. It was and is now, but coming out of that, it's a pretty remarkable collaborative partnership between conservation groups, dairy farmers, and others to do these kinds of projects. So, I'll make a motion to approve the project. Do we have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye.
Great, thank you.
Hey, with an eye on the clock, we may lose members at 1. We're going to be really close. Just to anticipate, my advice or suggestion is, given we're already missing 2 board members, maybe 3 when we get to 1 o'clock, I'd like to roll the executive session over to our spring meeting. I think it's an important topic where we want all of our board members engaged. Is that okay for everybody? Okay.
Okay, moving on to item 48, the Chino Hills project. Ms. Sadie Smith on our program, or our staff will be presenting the project. Sadie.
Thank you, John. This project involves a grant to the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority to allow them to acquire in fee the 320-acre Chino Hills East Bridge property. This proposal also includes the acceptance of a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Habitat Conservation Plan land acquisition grant and approval to subgrant these federal funds to the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority. The property is located in the Chino Hills, surrounded on 3 sides by open space that is part of the Chino Hills State Park. The acquisition of the property will complement the regional Orange County Central Coastal NCCP HCP. Conservation of the property is key to support the connectivity between populations of the coastal California gnatcatcher and coastal cactus wren in the Chino Hills, as well as isolated populations further north in the San Gabriel and Santa Susana Mountains. The acquisition is important for maintaining a gnatcatcher population within the northern range of the species because little open space remains in northern Orange County and Los Angeles. The property is composed primarily of grasslands, coastal sage scrub, coast live oak woodland, and southern cottonwood willow riparian forest are also found on the property. Species likely to benefit from the protection of the property include the coastal California gnatcatcher, northern harrier, coastal cactus wren, and other sensitive species. The property will be owned and managed and maintained by MRCA and will be incorporated into the assemblage of existing protected lands. MRCA will own and operate the property as part of its extensive land holdings in San Bernardino, Los Angeles, and Ventura counties.
MRCA is a joint powers authority and owns thousands of acres of open space across the region and has many years of experience in managing similar properties. The acquisition of the property will provide an opportunity for MRCA to protect and preserve the property's open space and natural resource values and potentially afford the recreational opportunities to the public, such as hiking, photography, biking, and wildlife viewing. There is the future potential that the property be transferred to the surrounding Chino Hills State Park. Should this occur, the transfer will be handled through an assignment and assumption of our grant agreement. The property, I lost my microphone? No, it's there. The property was appraised for $2,560,000 as approved by the Department of General Services. The property owner has agreed to sell the property for fair market value. Staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed. In the audience to answer questions is Mary Beth Wolf of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Ed Sauls, a landowner representative with the Sauls Company. And I'll take any questions.
Yes, thank you. The staff report says potential public recreational opportunities. Could you say a little bit more about what the plans are for that?
I can say I'll lean to Ed for consideration. Thank you, Ed.
Hi, Ed Sauls. Thank you, landowner representative. I would say that's really going to depend on the MRCA and their ownership, but I think what's intended here is it's surrounded on 2 to 3 sides by the Chino Hills State Park, and it's intended to be ultimately a part of that park program.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Wolf from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Thank you for considering this item. I think what we're looking for is compatibility. So we will be looking towards recreation that's compatible with the intent of the Section 6 grants. We're primarily for conservation of listed species. The gnatcatcher was the driver in addition to the cactus wren. So to the extent recreation is compatible, we'll look at that. So.
Any other questions for staff? We do not have any speaker cards on this. Any public comment? No? I'll make a motion to approve the project. All in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you. Montecito Ranch.
Jason Yee on our staff will present you the project. And while he's getting ready, I just want to point out this is one project where it fell under the board's appraisal policy because of the expenditure of WCB funds of more than $5 million in the project. So what that really meant was that the Wildlife Conservation Board staff contracted for the appraisal. We had the appraisal independently reviewed by a third-party independent appraiser, and we posted that review online for no less than 30 days. And during that time, we've not received any concerns about the appraisal. Plus having Department of General Services final review of that. So,
thank you, John. This WCB grant, along with cooperative funding provided by the U.S. Navy and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, will support the Endangered Habitats Conservancy with the acquisition of a property known as Montecito Ranch. The 955-acre property is located in the unincorporated community of Ramona in North San Diego County, 20 miles inland from the Pacific Ocean and 37 miles northeast of downtown San Diego. Ramona is an established residential, farming, and ranch community that has recently experienced an increase in residential development. Both suburban and rural residential development are encroaching the property from all directions. The property is identified as a priority for protection in the San Diego County Multiple Species Conservation Program in conjunction with CDFW's Natural Community Conservation Plans. The goals of these plans are to manage balanced growth while also identifying and preserving intact core wildlife linkages and key populations of sensitive species. The 3,500-acre WCB-funded Ramona Grasslands Reserve abuts the southern boundary of the property and is part of both plans. The preserve provides similar habitat as the subject property for many sensitive species. Majority of the property is characterized by gently rolling topography as well as some moderate and steep sloping terrain. Most of the property is comprised of undeveloped vacant land with the exception of an older residential home located near the southern boundary. The property is currently zoned as a specific plant area and is subject to an approved tentative subdivision map that allows for the development of 417 home sites. The property is characterized by habitat consisting mostly of grasslands, coastal sage scrub, southern mixed chaparral, oak woodlands, and vernal pools. This diverse habitat supports a variety of wildlife, including the federally threatened and endangered species of Stevens kangaroo rat, coastal California gnatcatcher, arroyo southwestern toad, San Diego fairy shrimp, and the federal and state endangered least Bowes vireo. Other species that benefit from the property's habitat include the bald eagle, golden eagle, and the ferruginous hawk. As a condition of the Navy's funding, a restrictive use easement will encumber a portion of the property. The purpose of the easement is to preserve the property for the benefit of the Stevens kangaroo rat and the California gnatcatcher, while also providing mitigation credits for the impacts of nearby military activities on the Camp Pendleton military base. A Navy management endowment will allow EHC in cooperation with CDFW to manage and monitor the property. Low-impact recreational opportunities in the form of hiking and birding, along with scientific research studies, will be considered once a thorough assessment of the habitat is completed. If approved, the acquisition will contribute to the success of both the MSCP and NCCP plans and prevent development fragmentation and support the preservations of intact core habitat and corridor linkages with adjacent protected lands. Staff recommends the approval of this project as proposed. In the audience are Michael Beck from the Endangered Habitats Conservancy, Andrea Souther from the Natural Resource Specialist from Camp Pendleton, Mary Beth Wolf from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Warren Wong from the CDFW Region 5. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Questions? We do not have any speaker cards on this item.
Cool.
Anyone want to make a comment in the public? I'll second the motion. All in favor?
Great, thank you. Moving on to our last project, the Sequan Peak Ecological Reserve Expansion number 9 project. Candace Morgan, our staff, will present the project to you this morning.
Thank you, John. Is it not working? This proposed acquisition is for CDFW to acquire 163 acres of land in San Diego County. The property is located in the community of Dehesa and is contiguous to conserved habitat, including CDFW's Sequan Peak Ecological Reserve to the east and south, and Sequan Indian Reserve to the north and west of the property. You can see on the Zoom how it works into itself. The property is undeveloped with elevation variation spanning between 860 feet at the riverbed on the southern portion of the property to a 1,608-foot peak along the easterly property line. The terrain includes southern coast live oak riparian forest in the riverbed, chaparral to the north and south of the river, and coastal sage scrub to the north. The focus of this acquisition is on the riparian and aquatic habitat and dependent special status species, including the federally endangered arroyo toad and least Bell's vireo. The riparian and stream habitats within the property are intact and contiguous. In fact, 1,700 feet of the Sweetwater River flows through the southern portion of the property. The habitat on the property is also suitable for the federally endangered Quino checker spot butterfly. This acquisition will contribute to several land programs with a focus to augment long-term habitat conservation, including the San Diego Multi-Species Conservation Program. The property is also within the County of San Diego's Biological Resource Core area, and acquisition of the property will contribute to the San Diego Regional Natural Community Conservation Planning Program. Additionally, the southern portion of the property is a priority for habitat mitigation within a pre-approved mitigation area. Furthermore, protection of the property will prevent future development that could result in fragmented landscape and restricted connectivity between the existing protected areas. CDFW will manage the property as part of the existing Sequan Peak Ecological Reserve. Possible future public use opportunities to be considered would include hiking, photography, and bird watching. The property was appraised and approved by DGS as having a fair market value of $1,716,000. And in the audience to help answer any questions is Warren Wong, Senior Environmental Scientist for CDFW Region 5, and Ann Van Leer from the Land Conservation Brokerage, who represents the property owners.
Any questions for staff? You have us worn down at this point after
Sorry.
60 projects.
Maybe that's a good thing.
I could have put all the consent calendar items on presentation.
Okay, we don't have any speaker cards. Is there anyone in the public that wants to comment on this project? Okay. I'll make a motion to approve this project. All in favor? Aye.
Thank
you, Candace.
Okay, well done. We're going to roll over item 52. John can elect to give his executive director's report at his own peril.
There's two things I want to mention. One is our solicitation for 2020. Our solicitation schedule for 2020 is out on our website right now. It's out on Facebook. So look for that if you have any questions. That lists several of the Prop 68 solicitations that we'll be putting out this coming year. The other thing is I just have some dates that I'd like for you guys to think about. One is March 23rd, which Kara mentioned earlier, the Lower American River Advisory Committee meeting is being held on the 23rd. Then we have our stream flow meeting to consider stream flow projects on April 1st. And then also on April 14th, save the date, down in Southern California, the Wildlife Conservation Board staff will be hosting a workshop with Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy as well as the Rivers and Mountain Conservancy staff to talk about urban conservation. And really what I'm looking forward to getting out of that is what really urban conservation should mean or will mean for the WCB and how we can engage more fully in that as we work forward going into the future. The other thing is, just real quick, I was going to highlight our 2019 year-end review. I think all the board members got a copy of that. I would encourage the public to contact us if you have not seen this. We will be posting it on our website, but we're working through an ADA compatible process right now to make it accessible for everyone on the web. So we'll be doing that. And with that, I'm done.
I can see what he really wants to report on. It's much longer. So, hey, thanks for hanging in there, and we'll see you soon at the next meeting. So we're adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff.